Given their reservations to support his plans to challenge Earl Mathis and the Herbalist Society, Kevin gave Michael Rafferty and the others 3 days to decide their positions on the matter. After they left, Kevin spent some time studying the secret book until he was informed about the arrival of some members of the Rangers. When Kevin refused to tell Bernard Fisher and the others about the situation at the ancient battlefield and the identity of his mentor, the old man who accompanied them decided to test his strength by enveloping him with his spiritual energy. However, when Kevin calmly countered with his own power base, the old man was shocked to discover that he possessed the spiritual energy-devouring aura of the 10 Directions. As a high-ranking officer of the Rangers, Emissar Holland had been fortunate enough to come into contact with a 10 Direction fragment in the past, so he was very familiar with its aura. Upon hearing the old man mention this, Kevin pretended to be confused and asked, "The 10 Directions? What is that?" However, his heart was as clear as a mirror. Ever since he broke through to level 7, Kevin could clearly feel that he had fully absorbed the power of the 10 Directions, which gave him special abilities that he had hidden. When Emerson Holland stared at Kevin, he didn't see any obvious clues from his expression to indicate that he was lying. This made him think that perhaps Kevin really didn't know about the existence of the 10 Directions.
"Mr. Williams, let me ask you something. Have you come into contact with some kind of extremely cold and dark entity?"
Emerson paused for a moment, then added,
"Please, think about it carefully. It is a matter of great importance."
"I don't understand, but there is nothing left to discuss." Kevin narrowed his eyes and uttered in an unfriendly tone. Emerson took a deep breath and nodded.
"Sorry to have bothered you."
With that, Emerson Holland gave Kevin one last look before reluctantly leaving the mansion with Jasper Hoffman and Bernard Fisher. Looking at their departing figures, Kevin felt uneasy. The matter of the 10 Directions was too tricky to discuss openly with just anyone. At the same time, Kevin didn't want to risk becoming enemies with the Rangers.
"I should have known that you were on the path to becoming a top expert. Perhaps I am really old and blind not to have realized it until now,"
Scott Whitney said with a sigh. Upon hearing this, Kevin squeezed out a curious smile and asked, "Mr. Whitney, if I told you that today is the first time I have heard of such a thing, would you believe me?" Scott was slightly stunned when he heard that, and then he shook his head lightly.
"Whatever you want to say is up to you," Scott replied in disbelief.
"Mr. Whitney, I'm not lying to you. Why don't you tell me more about what a mage is, exactly?" Kevin asked again while raising his eyebrows.
"You really don't know? Mages are known to be rare and elusive figures, but their talents are outstanding and they have mastered special abilities, such as herbalism and extraordinary strength. Moreover, as they travel around the world, they do not seek fame or fortune. At the end of the day, they only want to find a suitable successor to mentor and pass down all their abilities to them."
"It doesn't sound like much. They really don't deserve such a legendary-sounding title," Kevin said.
"Be careful with your words. Mages are not to be trifled with. With their abilities, they are definitely the most powerful beings in the world. You will understand how powerful they are when you encounter one in the future," Scott warned. He then added, "Anyway, it's getting late. I will not disturb you any longer. I should head back as well."
After Scott Whitney left, Kevin continued to think about things for a few minutes before getting up from the sofa and moving to the courtyard. Suddenly, Kevin put his hands behind his back and said faintly, "No one else is around." As soon as he finished speaking, 2 figures quickly moved across the roof and arrived in front of Kevin in the blink of an eye. "Greetings, Messenger Williams," a woman uttered as she respectfully went down on one knee and lowered her head before him. At the same time, the man standing beside her simply gave Kevin a disdainful look. These 2 people were none other than the Alliance's Shannon Tate and Lee Titchener. As soon as they left the ancient battlefield, they hurried over to Washington, D.C. to find Kevin. "Who is he?" Kevin asked while pointing to him. As far as Lee Tichenor was concerned, the one who had injured him and saved the people of the Myriads was Archie Robin's father. "Sir, he is Lee Tichenor, the newly promoted sergeant-at-arms." Shannon then turned her head and scolded him discontentedly. "What are you doing? Get down on your knees and apologize immediately." "Huh. Why should I? Looking at him from head to toe, he doesn't look like much. How can you convince me that he should be respected?" Lee complained. "If it wasn't for the Alliance leader and the director's high regard for him, he would only be worthy of licking my shoes as a lowly subordinate." "How dare you speak to Messenger Williams like that?" Shannon Tate knew how powerful Kevin was. Back in the ancient tomb, she had seen the strength that he displayed and even saved her life. She had told Lee many things about him on the way to Washington, so she never thought that he would act so rudely in front of Kevin. "So what? I still won't acknowledge him." Lee sneered with contempt. "Only those who are stronger can make me yield before them. How much talent does he have compared to me?" Shannon fumed upon hearing this. "You—" Just then, Kevin raised his hand and interrupted her. He then looked at Lee without changing his expression and asked, "It seems that you have a very strong opinion of me. Have we met before?" "Of course not. I have always worked for the Alliance at our headquarters. Meanwhile, you only know how to sit and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. Your fancy title as messenger is nothing more than a reward given to you by the Alliance leader for the Night King's sake." Lee grimly retorted, "Whether or not I have earned the right to be messenger, my position was still given to me by the Alliance leader. In that case, don't you deserve to be punished for offending your superior?" Kevin threatened in a somber tone. Although he didn't know why the two of them had come to DC, Kevin felt that if he didn't teach this man a lesson now and put him in his place, he would definitely be a thorn in his side in the future. "What crime would I be guilty of? Do you think that you have the ability to punish me?" Lee continued to mock him. "All right, then let me try to show you what I'm capable of. If I still don't convince you to respect me today, my position as messenger will be yours moving forward." As Kevin said this, his expression had become completely serious. A smile instantly appeared on Lee's face as he quickly agreed. "Deal." Shannon had already reminded Lee not to mess with Kevin countless times. Was he really that blinded by power to let his greed and pride get in the way? Before she could react and say something, Kevin suddenly kicked Lee's chest. The force was so great that it made him slide backward, forming 2 deep holes in the ground. Despite this, Lee did not seem to be that affected. After he pulled himself up, he simply brushed off the dust on his chest. "Your speed is not bad, but unfortunately your strength is too weak to deal any real damage," Lee said in disdain. "You want more? Then let me see how tough your skin is." A cold light flashed across Kevin's eyes. A second later, he arrived in front of Lee Tichenor and quickly struck him in the stomach. But before Kevin's punch could land, Lee suddenly roared as a golden light emitted from his body, which immediately caused a strong wind to blow against his face. Fortunately, just as Lee swung his fist, Kevin had already retreated more than a dozen steps. "No wonder you're so arrogant. You know a fierce body transformation technique that can harden your bones like iron," Kevin observed thoughtfully. "So what if you have already guessed it? Not many people in the Alliance can break through my elite defense," Lee boasted in an extremely haughty manner. Let me give it a try," Kevin responded as he took a deep breath and lunged forward once again. Of course, Lee did not want to let Kevin attack unopposed. He then stomped hard on the ground with his right foot and rushed forward. Seeing the ferocious look in Lee's eyes, it was obvious that he wanted to kill Kevin. At the same time, Kevin seemed to be interested in testing his strength. To start, he excitedly fought Lee with the strength equivalent to a 4th stage level 5 warrior. Although Kevin's true power base was much stronger and improving very quickly, he knew very well what was lacking in him. Whether it was compared to Lee Tichenor or someone like Archie Robbins and Earl Mathis, he was not only young, but he also had very little combat experience. Because of this, Kevin had usually been forced to defend and attack using the full force of his spiritual energy to crush his opponents decisively every time. With Lee being too arrogant for his own good, Kevin figured that now would be the perfect opportunity to do so. Besides, since Lee's power base was at the 3rd stage of level 5, no one below the 5th stage could break through his defensive technique. With that, a muffled sound was heard as Kevin punched Lee's abdomen, forcing him to take a few steps back. As their battle progressed, Lee became more shocked. He found that although Kevin's strength still seemed a little lacking to defeat him, his own power base had been completely suppressed by Kevin with relative ease. Still, not willing to admit that Kevin was stronger, Lee snickered. It's just a waste of time to show off your moves. No matter how much strength you have, you can't break through my defense. Besides, it wasn't like he had never fought someone with a higher power base. Every time he could rely on his elite defense to exhaust his opponent's spiritual energy. All right, then I'll fulfill your wish tonight and penetrate your defense, Kevin replied as he stretched his arms. What a load of crap, Lee cursed. Kevin's eyes narrowed. He then attacked again, but this time his speed was much faster, so neither Lee nor Shannon Tate could catch him moving. Suddenly, it sounded like rain was hitting the glass as Lee felt extreme pain all over his body. He instantly understood that Kevin was looking for a weakness in his body. I've already trained my body to endure an intense amount of pain, so what if I let him attack me relentlessly for an entire night? Lee thought to himself. In line with this, Lee completely stopped attacking and stood still to focus on his defense. As time passed, Shannon Tate could only see sparks coming from his body as Kevin continuously punched and kicked him from all angles. Suddenly, Kevin stopped in front of Lee Tichenor and kicked his right elbow with force. After being sent flying and crashing into a wall, Lee saw that his right arm had been badly fractured from the impact. It's true that your technique and power base has allowed you to have good defensive strength. Even a 5th stage level 5 warrior wouldn't be able to break through your defense in 2 hours. That being said, it's just a pity that you are too bold and reckless to know any better, Kevin callously remarked. He then put one hand behind his back and stood where he was, as if almost murmuring to himself. You have forgotten the principle of cutting a thick rope. Even with iron bones, any part of your body will inevitably break after experiencing hundreds and thousands of strikes in the same place. As Lee looked at Kevin in a daze, cold sweat kept trickling down his forehead. However, even though he had already regained his senses enough to feel the heart-piercing pain in his right arm, he arrogantly endured it to avoid making a sound. Kevin slowly walked toward him and asked in a commanding voice, "Have I convinced you enough yet?" "What is there to be convinced about if you take shortcuts? If you really have the ability, then why don't you wait for me to recover and fight you face to face?" Lee answered defiantly as he gritted his teeth. Shannon Tate, who was watching off to the side, shook her head speechlessly at his words. "I guess you took being called bold and reckless as a compliment," Kevin sighed. He then looked down at him from above and stepped on his right knee. "I will ask you one last time whether you will submit or not." "Stop with this nonsense. Although you are the messenger, I am also the sergeant-at-arms. Since I'm also one of the Alliance's higher-ups, would you really dare to seriously injure me? Do you have the courage to do so?" Lee sniffed as he seethed in anger. Unfortunately, Kevin did not take his threat seriously and immediately stomped on his knee. A cracking sound echoed throughout the courtyard. With his eyes wide open, Lee Tichenor couldn't hold it in anymore and let out a miserable shriek. "Don't think that you're off the hook. I'm just getting started." Not only did Kevin destroy his right knee with a single stomp, but to add insult to injury, he then used his foot to repeatedly twist his broken bones. No longer able to defend himself, Lee could only keep crying out in pain, not knowing when this hellish torture would end. Kevin was accosted by an old Alliance peer and friend, Shannon Tate, who was with a new Alliance officer, Lee Tichenor. who surprised both Shannon and Kevin by not showing Kevin suitable respect and challenging him to a fight. Kevin took on the fight while knowing he had far greater powers than Lee, but he saw it as a practice battle in which he would not use his full powers. Lee natively thought he had a chance in the battle, but was soon defeated, though he assumed Kevin would not dare to kill him, despite the battle being a to-the-death match. As soon as they heard a commotion, Troy Evans and the others from the vanguard immediately went to the window to see what was going on outside. However, when they saw that Kevin was personally the one handling the matter, none of them felt the need to help. Putting aside the fact that Lee Tichenor did not look like a powerful person, they knew that they weren't needed by Kevin at the moment. Shannon Tate was also not worried for Kevin's safety. She could only blame Lee for what happened tonight. Despite all of her warnings, he foolishly brought this situation upon himself. As messenger of the Alliance, Kevin's position was only outranked by the Alliance leader and his wife. However, Lee stubbornly refused to acknowledge him and provoked his wrath. With Kevin seemingly having no intention of stopping anytime soon, she helplessly lowered her head, as if to pretend that she did not see nor hear anything. Just then, Kevin looked at Lee coldly and asked, "Are you finally convinced of my strength?" However, Lee would rather die than submit. "Never! If you really have the guts, why don't you kill me tonight? I don't believe that you have the guts to do it. Otherwise, the Alliance leader will definitely seek justice for me." While Kevin admired people with integrity, he also liked to remove arrogance from people like Lee Tichenor by teaching them a lesson. "All right. I would like to see how long you can remain so tough." Kevin scoffed as he stepped forcefully on Lee's other foot. "Screw you!" Lee retorted as he gritted his teeth and ignored the pain in his legs. He then clenched his fist tightly and punched Kevin. You don't know what death is," Kevin cackled as he slightly bent his waist and easily caught Lee's fist with his left hand. Refusing to let him go, Kevin suddenly twisted Lee's fists with a backhand force. With this, two cracking sounds were heard as both of his wrists were instantly broken. The intense pain made Lee's head feel like it was going to explode. "Kevin, even if I die today, I will make sure to drag you down with me," Lee roared. Staring madly at Kevin with bloodshot eyes, a dazzling golden light once again emitted from his body. At this moment, Lee Tichenor no longer wished to beg for mercy. Instead, he wanted to die together with Kevin. Not knowing what he was thinking, Kevin slightly rotated his right hand. This unleashed a black and white light that entered Lee's body and suppressed his golden light. When Kevin's spiritual energy pierced through Lee's chest, blood started gushing out of his mouth. At this moment, the golden light coming from Lee's body had already disappeared. Moreover, his originally clear eyes had also quickly dimmed as the spiritual energy in his body was dissipated. Lee couldn't believe that Kevin had not only broken his right leg and both of his wrists, but also devoured his power base. "Did you think you could just self-destruct without my permission? You're not getting away that easily. Instead, I will slowly torture you until you give in and submit to me." As his voice fell, Kevin's right hand slid down Lee Tichenor's chest and forcefully pulled one of his ribs out. A miserable scream came out of Lee's mouth again, but this time he could no longer resist the pain and only hoped to die right that instant. "Kevin, I cannot live under the same sky as you," Lee shouted in pain. It wasn't that he was being tough. By now, the disdain in Lee's heart had been replaced by feelings of intense hatred. So what if we can't live under the same sky? If you want to take revenge on me, you will have to find an opportunity in your next life." Kevin bellowed as he broke another one of Lee's ribs. Seeing this, Shannon Tate could not bear it any longer. She slowly walked over to Kevin, knelt on the ground, and pleaded, "Messenger Williams, please show mercy." Kevin glanced at her coldly and asked, "You dare to speak for him?" While she had seen countless life-or-death situations, killing people was usually nothing more than a quick wave of the hand. She had never seen someone as ferocious as Kevin. "Sir, Lee Tichenor is the Alliance's Sergeant-at-Arms. If he dies in your hands tonight, you will not be able to absolve yourself of the blame when the Alliance leader finds out about this," Shannon yelled. She knew that if Lee died, the Alliance leader would definitely punish her as well. After all, she was the one who volunteered to speak with Kevin in Washington, and Lee had merely decided to come with her. Compared to offending Kevin, Shannon did not want to face the fury of the Alliance leader. Just then, Kevin turned his head and asked again, "Are you threatening me?" I am only telling you the truth." Shannon stuttered in fear as her hands tightly clenched the corner of her clothes. Although she was the current head of the administrators while Lee Tichenor was the new sergeant-at-arms, they were probably nothing more than ants to someone like Kevin in terms of status and strength. "Don't beg for mercy." Despite being on the verge of death, Lee Tichenor still refused to lower his pride. His eyes were still filled with loathing as he turned his attention back to Kevin. "As long as I don't die tonight, you can forget about having a good life in the future. I may indeed not be on your level, but you still have family and friends, right? You can't possibly stay by their side 24 hours a day." He then added, "As long as I find a chance, I'll torture them to death with the cruelest methods imaginable." After he said this, Shannon Tate almost couldn't help but think of killing Lee Tichenor herself. What was he thinking? Did he really not want to save his own life? "Did you hear what he said?" Kevin told Shannon as he turned his head and looked back at Lee with his eyes lowered. "Sir, he probably just blurted it out on impulse and didn't mean it. Besides, you have already crippled his power base and broken several bones in his body. From now on, he will not be a threat to you." Shannon implored, but her entire body was trembling slightly. She could already feel the strong killing intent from Kevin's aura. Ignoring her plea, Kevin stared at Lee and sneered. "You want to go after the people close to me?" "That's right. I want to make them suffer several times worse than what you've done to me," Lee retorted as the corner of his mouth flashed a crazed smile. "It's a pity that you won't have the chance," Kevin condemned as he shook his head with finality. When Shannon realized this, she immediately tried to stop him. "Messenger Williams, don't!" He then struck Lee's head with powerful force, causing his body to tremble a few times before he finally stopped moving. As if he had just done something casual, Kevin instructed without any emotion, "Get rid of him. Make sure to leave no trace." "Yes, Mr. Williams," Dustin Newman and Barry Damon said as they rushed to the courtyard. Unbeknownst to everyone, the real reason why Kevin wanted to kill Lee Tichenor was not merely because of a few provocative words. Back in the ancient battlefield, when Kevin overheard that Lee wanted to use Brett Stewart's head in exchange for a chance to make a name for himself, he was already destined not to live for very long in his mind. Without even turning his head, Kevin asked Shannon Tate with his back facing her, "Tell me, why did you come back here all of a sudden?" "The Alliance leader has ordered us to work with you to investigate the Robbins family here in D.C., Shannon answered in a low voice. Her heart was filled with fear. How could he kill the Alliance's sergeant-at-arms so easily? The Robbins family? What's going on? Kevin asked as he slowly turned around and frowned, pretending not to know anything about this. However, his heart was actually filled with joy. After the stunt he pulled at the ancient battlefield, he figured that the Alliance would launch an attack on the Robbins family at some point, but he didn't expect them to act so quickly. To tell you the truth, we had the battle won quite easily against the Myriads thanks to the brilliance of the Alliance leader, but just as we were about to finish off their remaining forces and finally capture Brett Stewart, someone from the Robbins family suddenly came out of nowhere and helped them escape from our encirclement. Shannon recounted concisely. How could the Myriads still be rescued when they were surrounded and outnumbered? Who was the one commanding at that time? It can't be that piece of trash I just dealt with, right? Kevin pointed at Lee Tichenor's corpse and asked, even though he already knew the answer. Sir, please help us look into this. Shannon persuaded him without mentioning Lee's name. After all, he was already dead, so there was no need for her to bring it up and upset Kevin again. You mentioned that the Robbins family was behind this? I have indeed dealt with them several times as of late, but as far as I know, they are only a regular expert family. What do they have to do with the Myriads? Kevin pretended to be lost in thought as he crossed one arm in front of his chest and stroked his chin with his other hand. The Alliance leader also doesn't understand, but since you are currently based in Washington, he is asking for your help to investigate the Robbins family. Shannon explained honestly. It seems like the Robbins family is not as simple as it seems. Kevin continued to feign a puzzled expression and slowly turned to look at Shannon. Seeing that she was still kneeling on the ground, he calmly remarked, "Get up first. After returning from the ancient battlefield, you immediately rushed to Washington and informed me about this. I know you must be tired, so I will arrange for someone to find a place for you to rest." "Thank you, sir," Shannon replied gratefully. Suddenly, Shannon Tate felt her vision blur and she fell to the ground softly. Without her knowledge, Troy Evans had quietly snuck up behind her at some point and blew some sleeping powder in her direction. This was because while Kevin and Shannon were talking earlier, he had secretly given Troy a hand signal to do so. After all, Shannon Tate was one of the higher-ups of the Alliance. If Kevin wasn't careful, she could easily find out about the newly established Williams family school and inform the Alliance leader about it. This would give the Alliance something that could be used against him in the future. Besides, if the Alliance was truly aligned with the Pinnacle, he couldn't afford to go up against them so soon, especially while he was just starting to build his own force in Washington. So he had to play his cards right and use them as an ally against the Robbins family instead. If I had known that this would cause me so much trouble, I wouldn't have joined the Alliance back then, Kevin sighed with some regret. Still, he knew in his heart that he really didn't have a choice. If he hadn't agreed to join the Alliance back then, he would have died a long time ago. It seems like if I want to cut ties with the Alliance, I have to find a way to get Selena Salem out. Kevin secretly planned in his heart. After some time, Shannon Tate slowly woke up and found that she was surrounded by darkness. There was only a candle emitting a dim light not far away from her, and a figure was sitting in front of it. "Who are you?" Shannon asked cautiously as her body instantly tensed up. The last thing she remembered before closing her eyes was that Kevin had promised to find a place for her to rest. When she reopened her eyes and regained consciousness, she mysteriously found herself here. "Come closer. I have something to tell you," the man said faintly. Hearing his familiar voice, Shannon called out in surprise, "Messenger Williams?" After realizing what had happened, she then slowly approached and asked doubtfully, "Sir, why did you attack me?" "Don't be too nervous. The reason why I had to do so was because I wanted to help you by completely getting rid of the evil pill's toxic effects on your body," Kevin explained faintly. Shannon Tate was stunned on the spot when she heard this. In order to ensure their loyalty, almost all of the Alliance's members had consumed the evil pill upon joining. Once its effects flared up, it felt like having 10,000 insects biting their skin, making them wish that they were dead rather than enduring extreme pain and discomfort. To prevent this from happening, the Alliance leader would distribute a temporary antidote on a designated day each year. But now, Kevin claimed to have actually freed her from the evil pill's toxic effects? This was simply inconceivable. "Don't be too surprised. This isn't the first time that I've done this." Kevin seemed to have seen through her thoughts and reassured her. "Sir, what conditions do you have?" Shannon finally calmed her mind and asked. She knew very well that there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world, and Kevin must have had a deeper reason for helping her. But Shannon had to figure out that reason before she became another murdered pawn in Kevin's plans. Kevin's battle with Lee Tichenor ended with Tichenor's death after he threatened to cause trouble to Kevin's family. Kevin now had to figure out how to handle the Alliance, which he knew was in a pact with the Pinnacle, but which Kevin also wanted to use to undermine the Robbins family. Shannon Tate, who was knocked unconscious by a sleeping powder that Troy Evans gave her on Kevin's orders, wondered, too, what Kevin might want from her as a member of the Alliance. At the moment, Shannon Tate couldn't even think of what Kevin could have in mind for her. In the Alliance, Kevin was already ranked above tens of thousands of members. Moreover, with the Night King as his mentor, he had developed a strong power base and exceptional herbalism skills. With so many achievements at such a young age, his future had limitless potential. Even though she had a fairly respectable position in the Alliance, Shannon knew she was nowhere near his level. Don't think too much, but now that I have cured the poison in your body, I don't think you should stay in the Alliance for much longer. Don't look at how many benefits they have given me. Doing so will only negatively affect your future, Kevin sighed and told her. Shocked, Shannon asked, "What do you mean?" You probably surmised that the Alliance leader has decided to align himself with the Pinnacle. No matter how powerful the Alliance has become because of it, they must face the consequences for colluding with such a great threat to humanity. So I suggest that you find an opportunity to leave the Alliance before it's too late, Kevin advised. Having also noticed the relationship between the Alliance and Pinnacle, Shannon understood what Kevin meant. Some things may sound simple but are extremely difficult to implement. The only effect of escaping from the Alliance is that I will forever be in hiding. After all, knowing that I came from the Alliance, what expert organization would dare to accept me as a member? And as an expert, it's already too late for me to go back to living the life of an ordinary person, Shannon expressed with some bitterness. Well, what if I can recommend you a safe place to go? Kevin brought up with a smile. Is that a joke? Who would dare to go against the Alliance? Shannon asked in disbelief. If you really want to leave the Alliance, I can give you a way out. But if you aren't willing to, then we can just forget about this conversation, Kevin responded. Although his tone was not threatening, the meaning behind his words was obvious. How could they pretend as if this conversation never happened? Only the dead could keep secrets forever. Without much time to think, Shannon suddenly came up with a clever response. If you have a plan in mind, can you tell me about it first? The plan is simple. First, I will send a message back to the headquarters and tell the Alliance leader that you died at the hands of the Robbins family's patriarch. At the same time, I will arrange for you to join the Radiance. The Radiance? The organization that rose up as a dark horse among the major powers recently? Do you have any connections with them? Shannon asked. I can tell you frankly that I have also joined the Radiance. If you agree to switch sides, I can assure you that the Alliance will never find you, Kevin promised her. Putting aside the fact that the location of the Radiance's headquarters was already well hidden, Kevin had also set up a formation in its surroundings. So unless the Alliance leader decided to come after her personally, no one in the Alliance would be able to break through it. As soon as he said this, Shannon agreed to his plan without thinking. All right, I believe you. She had long heard that although the Radiance was a new organization, their strength was quite impressive. Moreover, the higher the power base of a new recruit, the more benefits they would get from joining. In the meantime, to err on the side of caution, you should stay here for the next few days. After that, I will arrange for someone to come and pick you up, Kevin said as they left the basement. As for using the Alliance to eliminate the Robbins family, if his plan really worked, it would be like killing two birds with one stone. After all, not only would he have one fewer enemy in Washington, but this incident would certainly alert the higher-ups of the government and prompt them to closely monitor the Alliance's activities. As soon as they found out that the Alliance had joined the Pinnacle, the government would surely take swift measures against them. The night passed quickly. The next day, when Kevin arrived on the first floor, he heard Dustin Newman complaining that they had been stuck inside the mansion for too long. Mr. Williams, you are really too biased. You only let Jordan and Justin Black have fun outside all day long. What about the rest of us? Dustin said jokingly. How about you call them back and trade places with us? We wouldn't mind managing the school instead. Last night, Kevin had already contacted Spencer and asked him to send a few members to Washington and take Shannon to the Radiance's headquarters. Kevin then turned around and looked at Violet Sweeney and the others. Although they did not say anything, their eyes were full of expectation. Given this, Kevin snapped his fingers and ordered, All right, let's go out today and see how the school is doing. As soon as they heard that they could finally go out, huge smiles appeared on all of their faces. After less than an hour's drive, they arrived at the Williams family school. The news of Kevin's power base breaking through to level 7 had spread like wildfire across Washington. And with Tyler Dawn and Terry Watford by his side, many influential figures from the business world naturally came here to show their support. Some families even sent their people over to train here. At the moment, Kevin had just parked, but before anyone could get out of the car, they all heard a loud bang.
"What happened, Mr. Williams?"
Troy Evans asked with a slight frown. Barry Damon's face instantly darkened. Thinking that someone had attacked them, he almost broke out of the door to confront whoever it was. "Don't be impulsive. Someone's car has just bumped into us. It's probably just an accident." Although Kevin reassured everyone, his mood has soured as well. After all, how could he be sure that the person did not have any ill intentions? "You guys stay in the car. I'll go out first and take a look," Kevin instructed. "Hey, are you blind? Do you not see my car from your rearview mirror?" An arrogant voice suddenly sounded. Following the voice, Barry Damon and the others saw a man in a suit staring furiously at Kevin. "If I'm not mistaken, you seem to be the one who bumped into my parked car," Kevin pointed out with a scowl on his face. While it was just a small matter that he didn't really want to waste too much energy on, Kevin couldn't afford to let this man's arrogance slide. "What the hell? What do you mean I hit your car? You were the one who drove too fast and stole my parking spot," the man snarled. "What are you talking about? This parking lot is a public area where cars can park freely as they wish on a first-come, first-served basis. How is it my fault that you are so slow?" Kevin retorted. "What did you just say? Do you know that this is the parking lot of the Williams family school? Since I am a student here, I am entitled to this parking spot," the man boasted. "Oh, you are a student here. What's your name?" Kevin asked with a frown. "My name is Ezra Mullins," the man proudly introduced himself. "What is your teacher's name?" Kevin was not interested in dealing with this man. "Who do you think you are? Do you think you deserve to know my teacher's name?" Ezra sneered. "If you want to leave this place safe and sound today, you have to pay me for repairing my car and wasting my time. Otherwise, I will ask someone to teach you a lesson." Just then, Troy Evans and the others who were waiting in the car overheard his threat and emerged. Seeing that Kevin had more people behind him, Ezra Mullins' expression changed slightly. Competing with me in terms of numbers?" Ezra hurriedly took out his phone and dialed a number. "Sir, something happened to me in the parking lot. This man not only stole my parking spot but also crashed into my car. I hope you can send a few others over to help me teach him a lesson right now." After hanging up the phone, Ezra raised his head and issued a warning to Kevin and the others. "If you know what's good for you, you had better pay up and leave immediately. Otherwise, when my teacher comes over, you won't even have the chance to beg for mercy." While Kevin tried his best to ignore him, his face became gloomier due to Ezra's arrogance. In his heart, no matter how rich and influential their families were, he absolutely wouldn't allow any bullies to get away with something like this at his school. Soon, more than a dozen people walked out of the building. The leader of the group, who seemed to be their teacher, was tall and strong, and his aura was intimidating. With one look, Kevin could tell that he was not a friendly person. "Sir, I'm over here!" Ezra waved his hands excitedly. He then ran toward his teacher and pointed at Kevin and the others while whispering something in his ear. A few minutes later, the teacher walked over with a gloomy face. "So you're the one who's been causing trouble here today? How dare you hit my student's car and refuse to take responsibility?" The teacher fumed as he kept looking at Kevin and the others. "Who are you?" Kevin asked callously. "You don't need to know who I am. Look at yourself. Compared to you, my students are all people who do not lack money. Now that I have arrived and brought so many of them with me, we can't just come here for nothing, right?" the teacher uttered with an evil smile on his face. The young men standing behind him all looked at Kevin and the others like they were sheep waiting to be slaughtered. This was especially the case for Ezra Mullins, who looked like a cat who had just caught a mouse. "Don't worry, I'll make a call and I'll definitely make arrangements for all of you." A cold light flashed in Kevin's eyes as he dialed Jordan Black's number. Without any nonsense, he then ordered, "I am in the parking lot of the school." Without any nonsense, he then ordered, "I am in the parking lot of the school. Come over here right now." Seeing his actions, the teacher couldn't help but laugh. He then crossed his arms in front of his chest and disdainfully lectured, "Kid, I advise you to be more sensible. The Williams family school is not easy to mess with. If you can use money to solve this problem, then just pay up. There's no need to use violence to settle this matter." Thinking that this was their territory, these men were not afraid of Kevin daring to play any tricks on them. "Don't worry, someone will give you an explanation when they arrive soon," Kevin responded. Troy Evans looked at these people and shook his head slightly. He knew that not only would these people be put in their place shortly, but even Jordan and Justin Black would also have to face Kevin's anger when they arrived. Right on cue, the two brothers ran over quickly, pushing the crowd aside as they made their way through. As soon as they arrived in front of Kevin, they stood straight and respectfully greeted him. "Mr. Williams." When he saw the two of them, Ezra Mullins almost jumped up in excitement. Seeing that two of the Williams family school's higher-ups had come forward because of this incident, this was enough for him to brag to everyone for a year. "What are you guys doing here?" the teacher called out cautiously. "Shut up!" Jordan Black scolded him angrily. When he turned around and felt Kevin's cold gaze, Jordan seemed to be at a loss for what to do. But before Kevin could say anything, another wave of footsteps was heard approaching as more than 20 men ran out from inside the school. After all, as the ones who recruited them, they treated Jordan and Justin Black as their leaders and were loyal to them. "What's his name?" Kevin asked as he pointed to the teacher with his chin propped up. "Mr. Williams. His name is Cyrus Briggs," Jordan answered truthfully. "He's one of the recruits who followed us from Detroit to Washington." "Did something happen, Mr. Williams?" Justin bit the bullet and forced himself to ask the obvious. You two really did take in some good recruits, didn't you? How come you didn't see how arrogant he was before?" Dustin Newman snickered, taking pleasure in their mistake. Fortunately, before he could say anything else, Troy Evans patted his shoulder and turned to Kevin. At the same time, Barry Damon quickly walked over to Jordan and Justin's side and quickly told them everything that had happened. After getting up to speed on all of the details, the faces of the two brothers immediately turned glum. "You guys better handle this matter before things get out of hand," Barry advised as he looked at the two of them deeply. Jordan turned around angrily and slapped Cyrus Briggs' face. He then cursed. "You bastard! How dare you offend Mr. Williams? Do you know who he is?" The strong force of the slap made Cyrus spin around before he fell to the ground. How could he have made such a mistake as to not recognize Kevin Williams? With his vanguard followers eager to explore D.C., Kevin took them to his newly formed school, where he butted heads with a brash student, Ezra Mullins, and his equally arrogant teacher, Cyrus Briggs, neither of whom recognized this man who they deemed to be low class and ordinary to be the founder of the Williams School. After being hit by Kevin's soldier, Cyrus Briggs covered his face and lay down on the ground, looking at Jordan Black with a confused expression. Aside from him, all of the people in the surrounding crowd were stunned, and the smile on Ezra Mullins' face instantly froze. "I heard that you guys were trying to extort a large sum of money from Mr. Williams. Tell me, do you really have the guts to face the consequences?" Justin Black was fuming as he questioned Cyrus. He then took out his sword and waved it around. Seeing this, the people in the crowd started to discuss amongst themselves in low voices. "What the hell? Who is this guy? Why do our leaders think so highly of him?" someone asked in disbelief. Amidst their discussion, some people couldn't bear it any longer and stepped forward to plead on Cyrus Briggs' behalf. "Mr. Black, in my opinion, this is all just a small misunderstanding. There's no need for violence. Besides, we're all family. We can't ruin our brotherhood just because of some outsiders," someone begged.
Mr. Black, we can't blame all of this on Mr. Briggs. It's that man's fault for not saying that he knew the two of you in advance. I think these outsiders were just purposely looking to cause some trouble today," one of Cyrus's students added. As the owner of this school, Troy Evans and the Vanguard members knew that Kevin was going to be angry. After all, it was one thing for Cyrus Briggs and the others not to know his identity, but how could they treat him so rudely? "Mr. Black, I really didn't know about any of this. If you really want to blame someone, Ezra Mullins is the main culprit. He was the one who called me over to help him," Cyrus said in a tremble. Judging from the cold aura that was radiating from Justin Black's body, he could sense that this was no laughing matter. After hearing Cyrus's words, both Justin and Jordan suddenly turned their gazes to a spot not far away from where the commotion was happening. Ezra Mullins, who felt that the atmosphere was getting tense, was trying to quietly sneak away through the crowd. But before he could escape, he had already been caught after locking eyes with the two brothers, leaving him no choice but to face their wrath. "Get your sorry butt back here," Jordan roared. After slowly dragging his feet back with his head lowered to them, Ezra stammered, "Mr. Black, I... "How dare you find trouble with Mr. Williams?" Jordan shoved Ezra and scolded him. "Do you know who he is? You are lucky to even be alive right now." The intense pain from Jordan's hard push made Ezra's face turn red as he curled up and doubled over. If it wasn't for the fact that he was gritting his teeth, Ezra might have vomited. "We owe our lives to Mr. Williams. Do you still dare to disrespect him?" Justin revealed to everyone while slowly pointing his sword at Ezra's neck. With fear in his eyes, Ezra begged for mercy. I really didn't know his identity. Please spare my life." Seeing Ezra like this, Justin snorted. He turned to Kevin and asked, "Mr. Williams, what do you want us to do with the two of them?" Kevin first looked at Justin, then at Ezra, who was now lying on the ground. He then shifted his attention to the people around him. "You guys don't seem to have any plans of acknowledging my presence." Kevin addressed them flatly. Almost immediately, a group of people lowered their heads as if they had nothing to do with Cyrus and the others. They were smart enough to know better than to offend Kevin. However, those who had previously pleaded in favor of Cyrus Briggs continued to look at Kevin with disdain and were not afraid to speak up against him. "What makes you worthy of our respect? If it wasn't for our two leaders stepping in just now, you wouldn't have even had the right to speak freely here," someone sneered. "If you know what's good for you, you'll take a step back and apologize to Mr. Briggs," another added. Seeing this, Jordan and Justin Black's hearts were filled with anger. If it wasn't for the fact that they were under the watchful eyes of the government in Washington, they would have already been pressed to the ground and dealt with accordingly for offending Kevin. Just as Jordan was about to reprimand them, Kevin slowly raised his right hand and waved him off. He then declared, "Since you guys seem to have such a good relationship, then get the hell out of this school. I don't care about arrogant lowlifes." When he finished speaking, these people couldn't help but snicker and looked at Kevin as if he was a fool. "Who do you think you are? Our leaders may have a great deal of respect for you, but you are a nobody to us," one of the people quipped. "We are loyal only to the Black brothers. You can't order us around like dogs," another jeered. Hearing such words, Jordan and Justin's faces froze. Even though what happened today had nothing to do with them, they were suddenly dragged into a precarious situation. At the same time, Kevin furrowed his brows and remarked, "Does this mean that your loyalty lies with Jordan and Justin Black alone?" "Were our words not clear enough for a dimwit like you?" a man retorted impatiently. "Instead of talking, why don't you fight us to your heart's content? I bet you're afraid of trying anything in front of our two leaders. Let me see you." Before the man could finish his words, he suddenly felt a fierce gust of wind blowing in his face. Unable to resist this, he stumbled and fell to the ground. Just then, a powerful force hit the ground, instantly shattering the concrete surrounding him.
The man coughed violently a few times and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. By the time the dust cleared, Kevin had already appeared in front of him. He then stared at the man coldly and said, "Do you think I'm afraid of anyone in this place? Let me teach everyone a lesson." A strong burst of spiritual energy was then emitted from Kevin's body, causing those who were overwhelmed by it to curl up on the ground as well. Kevin's strength had shocked them. They subconsciously felt as if they were not facing a human, but a mighty god who had descended upon them. "Go and call everyone inside the school over," Kevin instructed. Not wanting to draw Kevin's ire, Jordan Black complied and ran back inside to carry out his order. At the same time, Troy Evans sighed upon hearing this. As a smart man, he could already tell what Kevin was thinking. He wanted to establish his authority in front of the entire school. Before long, everyone had gathered. When they saw Kevin surrounded by a group of people who were struggling to breathe and wincing in pain on the ground, they started to discuss amongst themselves. "Quiet," Kevin announced. "Some of you know me while others don't. Either way, I have something important to tell you all today. Starting today, everyone must submit to me as your leader. For those who dare to challenge my authority, please step forward. Whoever can withstand one of my attacks will be named as the new head of the entire school." These ominous words immediately caused a huge commotion. "Who the hell do you think you are? How dare you act so arrogantly in front of everyone?" someone yelled. "Let me teach this guy a lesson today. Watch how I deal with him," another volunteered. It seemed that there was a group of people who were eager to give it a try. Now that the situation had developed, it was too late for Jordan and Justin Black to stop Kevin, even if they wanted to. But even if they could, who would dare to speak up against him? "Kid, why don't you stand firm and take a punch from an old man?" Suddenly, a figure shot out from the crowd, bringing along a strong gust of wind as he threw a punch toward Kevin's head. Seeing this, a mischievous smile flashed across Kevin's face. He then replied, "You overestimate yourself." Using his left hand, he casually shoved his opponent's arm, changing the direction of his punch. He then struck the old man's chest with his right hand, sending him flying like a kite before crashing into the windshield of a car. "Looks like you have some skills after all, but let's see if you can beat me," another challenger shouted as he quickly rushed toward Kevin. This person was clearly much stronger than the previous one, as he attempted a vicious side kick aimed at Kevin's chest. Despite this, Kevin simply stood still. He didn't even bother to turn around and anticipate his opponent's attack. Just as the man's foot was about to land on his chest, Kevin shocked everyone by beating him to it with a kick of his own. As the man fell to the ground, he spat out a mouthful of blood. With that, more and more people attacked in quick succession. However, no matter how many tricks and techniques were used against him, they could not shake him at all as Kevin calmly sent everyone flying in all directions. Soon, the parking lot was full of people lying on the ground. Except for Troy Evans and the few others who knew better, everyone else was wincing and wailing in pain. "Your mouths were very powerful, but your truth strength is so weak that you can't even withstand a single blow," Kevin noted with disdain and sarcasm. Although these people were upset with what he said, none of them could refute the fact that he was right. One by one, they all slowly looked at Kevin with fear. "You should all thank yourselves for being so weak that I decided to let you off this time with just a warning," Kevin then reprimanded in a stern voice. "But if you dare to bully others and abuse your power in the future, you will definitely face more severe consequences." He added, "Also, remember this. I am the owner and head of this school. If anyone dares to so much as speak rudely in front of me again, I will not hesitate to punish you for it." After dealing with these people, Kevin slowly turned around and looked at Jordan and Justin Black. "Mr. Williams, we are deeply sorry. Clearly, we have not done our jobs well in managing this school. Please, if you are going to punish anyone, it should be us." Jordan knelt on one knee and uttered, "Jordan is right. We should have disciplined our recruits better and taught everyone to acknowledge you as their leader from day one." Justin added as he knelt down before him as well. Just then, Troy Evans stepped in and tried to smooth things over.
Mr. Williams, this cannot be blamed completely on the two brothers. After all, no matter how much they train these recruits, people are still unpredictable at the end of the day.
Kevin turned to Troy and the others from the Vanguard with a smile and instructed, "You guys have been quite bored lately, haven't you? From now on, you don't have to stay at the mansion anymore. Instead, I'm assigning you all to the school to help keep an eye on these recruits. Don't let them cause any trouble in the future." After saying this, Kevin turned around and helped Jordan and Justin up from the ground. He then told them, "As for the two of you, I will forgive you for what happened this time. But if a similar situation arises in the future, you won't get off so easily." Jordan and Justin were overjoyed when they heard this and exclaimed in unison, "Thank you, Mr. Williams. We won't let you down ever again." Now that this matter had been settled, Kevin did not want to waste any more time and asked the two of them to show him around. Under their lead, Kevin spent the next 2 hours being escorted around every section of the school. Currently, many influential families in Washington have sent their people here to study. The ones teaching them are all previous recruits whom we brought in from Detroit, Jordan explained. From recruiting people in Detroit to managing my school here, I can see that things have been hard on the two of you as of late. Kevin observed as he took out 2 green pills. He then continued, "I can tell that you've reached a bottleneck at the 3rd stage of level 5. Am I right? These pills should be useful for you in breaking through to the next stage. Also, I have set up a formation in the basement of the mansion. Now filled with rich spiritual energy, feel free to go there for training to increase your chances of advancing even further." "Thank you, Mr. Williams." Both of them were grateful for the pills in their hands. Suddenly, Kevin's phone rang. When he checked who was calling, Spencer's name was displayed on his phone screen. Wondering what had happened, Kevin answered the phone and asked faintly, "What's wrong?" "Mr. Williams, we noticed that a lot of people with mysterious backgrounds have suddenly appeared in the Midwest. Some of them even have considerable strength," Spencer reported. Kevin thought for a moment and ordered, "They should be people from the Myriads. Don't worry, they are just recuperating after battling the Alliance on the ancient battlefield. In the meantime, don't become enemies with them. They might provide some help to us in the future." "Yes, Mr. Williams." Spencer hesitated for a moment and asked, "By the way, I have something else to discuss with you." What could this be about? Kevin wondered to himself, as he feared that his absence from Chicago and Lily's side could bring her into ever greater danger, even as all he did in life was to protect her from his enemies. Kevin had to summon his powers to quell an uprising of the teachers and students at his own school, who did not recognize him and deemed him a lowlife. Meanwhile, Spencer had alerted Kevin to an uprising in the Midwest, who were surely Myriad members as confirmed by Kevin, as well as another important matter that needed to be discussed. Out of everyone, Spencer and Derek were the earliest to follow Kevin. Their relationship went all the way back to when he first joined the Myriads as an enforcer, and he had chosen these two as his trusted deputies. Shortly after establishing the Radiance, Kevin had mostly left everything to the two of them to take care of. Given this, he also made sure to provide them with a lot of resources to aid in developing their power bases. Currently, Derek had already reached the 3rd stage of level 5, while Spencer was at the 4th stage of the same level. All along, these two men had been following Kevin's orders without ever asking for anything in return from him. "If you have anything to say, just tell me." "Mr. Williams, you see the Tanner brothers have all finished their seclusion, and their power bases currently range from between the 2nd to 4th stages of level 5. Meanwhile, both the Dixon brothers and the Hill siblings are still training in seclusion. Given this, Derek and I would like Elijah Tanner and his brothers to take over our role of managing the Radiance's day-to-day affairs. That way we can come to Washington to help you more closely." Spencer paused for a moment, then stammered, "Of course, this is merely an idea. The decision is up to you." What made you guys suddenly think of this? Are both of you so sick of the Radiants that you can't wait to leave?" Kevin joked lightly.
No. We have absolutely no complaints about working for you, Mr. Williams. Even if you ask us to stay in the Radiants' headquarters forever, we will serve you until the day we die,"
Spencer hurriedly reassured him. Because of this, the two men had always been deeply indebted and grateful to Kevin. As such, come hell or high water, they were willing to do anything for him in order to repay his kindness. However, while they were staying in the Radiants' headquarters as of late, they kept receiving news about how Kevin's life was constantly in danger in D.C. Furthermore, the various things that had happened since Troy Evans and the others arrived made them anxious. Sensing the eagerness and sincerity in Spencer's tone, Kevin smiled and sighed. After thinking for a while, he then decided, "I understand what you're thinking. Hand over everything related to the Radiants to Elijah Tanner and his brothers. Once you have settled that, bring 10 people with you to Washington. I'll send you guys the address later."
"Thank you, Mr. Williams,"
Spencer replied excitedly. "Don't celebrate too early. Let me warn you. Washington isn't something that the Midwest can compare with. If you guys are unable to help me when the time comes, I won't hesitate to send you back to the Radiants," Kevin cautioned half-jokingly.
"Don't worry, Mr. Williams. We won't let you down,"
Spencer exclaimed without any sense of worry. Just then, another call came in, so Kevin hurriedly wrapped things up with Spencer and ended their conversation. "Mr. Whitney, to what do I owe the pleasure of this call?" Kevin asked with a slight frown.
"I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Come to the Reaper Squad's base immediately," Scott urged.
"What's the matter? Why are you in such a hurry?" Kevin asked again as his brows furrowed.
"It's hard to explain things clearly to you with just a few words over the phone. Anyway, I'll wait for you at the entrance to keep you from starting a fight with your fellow members again."
Scott didn't give Kevin any chance to ask any more questions and abruptly hung up the phone. Staring at his phone, Kevin suddenly had a bad feeling. "You guys stay here at the school. I'm going out for a bit," Kevin told Troy Evans and the others as he left. At the same time in Chicago, Dalton Steele had just arrived on the 17th floor of a hotel alone. As soon as he stepped out of the elevator, he saw men in black suits standing side by side on both sides of the hallway. However, it seemed that he was the only guest here at this time. While these men would normally treat an outsider as if they were facing a great enemy, they did not react to Dalton's arrival. Last night, Dalton had just finished training his power base when a letter appeared, asking him to come to this hotel for a banquet at 12 o'clock today. Looking at the landscape of Chicago now, it could be said that virtually the entire city was already under Dalton's control. Given this, he was very curious to find out who had the guts to send him a mysterious invitation. Following the note in the envelope, Dalton found his way to the room number that was indicated. As soon as he opened the door, he saw a table filled with food and wine. At the same time, a man was standing by the window with his back facing him. Looking at his figure, Dalton suddenly felt that this man was familiar. But the bodyguards outside the door made it hard for him to think of a person in Chicago who had such a force behind him.
"Who are you? Why did you invite me here today?"
When the man finally turned around, he looked like he was in pain as he greeted him, saying,
"Dalton, has it really been that long since we last saw each other? It seems that you have already forgotten about me. Aren't we brothers? I am so disappointed." "Brett?"
Dalton was stunned for a moment. When he regained his senses, he walked over to him with a big smile and hugged him tightly. He then asked,
"When did you come back to Chicago? Why didn't you tell me in advance?"
"I just arrived yesterday. I'm actually here to seek shelter from you, brother," Brett Stewart explained while also giving Dalton a strong hug.
"Brett, what are you talking about? If you need anything, just let me know. I will definitely help you out without any questions," Dalton replied.
"Come on."
Brett gently pushed Dalton away and raised an eyebrow as he asked,
If I really ask you to do something for me that you didn't want to do, would you actually do it?
Brett, you must be joking. Is that why you called me over here in such a secretive manner? Chicago may not have been peaceful recently, but you don't have to worry about a thing, brother. Dalton reassured him.
Let's not talk about any more of this nonsense. After all, we haven't seen each other for a long time. We must eat and drink to our heart's content today, Brett exclaimed as he gestured for Dalton to sit down with him at the dining table. After that, they ate a lot of food and drank a few bottles of wine as they talked about a lot of things. I heard that you have been having some sort of conflict with Kevin recently. Why didn't you tell me earlier? If Kevin really did do something wrong, I would have immediately sent some of my men to deal with him, Brett casually brought up as he stared intently at Dalton. When Dalton heard his words, the smile on his face instantly disappeared. Slowly putting down the wine glass in his hand, Dalton sighed deeply, lowered his head, and asked,
Did Kevin tell you these things?
Is there really a need for him to tell me to find out? Kevin is not the kind of person who would hurt people behind their backs. Anyway, once I arrived in Chicago, someone reported that you two had already caused a ruckus all across the city. I was told that you were going to set up your own business consortium, Brett replied tersely.
Well, your information is not wrong, but I'm not really fighting with Kevin. We just have different views, so I decided to cut ties and forge my own path,
Dalton uttered while biting his lip. What exactly happened? Don't tell me that you're still going to hide it from me. Brett raised his voice and prodded while forcefully slapping the table. Hearing the sound, the doors of the private room were immediately opened from the outside, and a dozen men rushed in with fierce looks on their faces. Seeing this, Brett turned to them and scolded angrily. What the hell are you guys doing here? Get out of here! These people did not dare to disobey Brett's orders and hurriedly left the private room. Are you really not going to tell me what happened? At least let me know who's right and who's wrong so I won't be stuck between the two of you, Brett begged. Hearing this, Dalton grabbed a bottle of wine, raised his head, and drank half of it. He then responded,
Brett, like I said, you don't have to worry about this. I only want to get back to the things that rightfully belong to the Steele family. I didn't touch any of Kevin's properties. It seems that you have really made up your mind, Brett observed with some concern.
Dalton did not respond as he only looked down at the bottle in his hand. Knowing that he couldn't easily persuade Dalton Steele, Brett decided to stress one thing to him. Dalton, I just have one request to ask of you, and I will also tell Kevin the same thing. No matter what you two do, you can't kill each other. Otherwise, no matter who breaks this rule, I'll avenge the other. Dalton leaned back in his chair and said,
According to the information I received, Kevin has been doing very well in Washington. Not only has he established his own school, but he has also broken through to level 7. I don't mind if he decides to stay there for good in the future. Do you really think that he will stay in Washington forever? Chicago was the foundation that he had built with great difficulty. How could he allow you to snatch it all away from him just like that? Do you think he is that easy to deal with? Brett cautioned. He then stared into Dalton's eyes as if he was trying to see through him. Unfortunately, he still couldn't figure out what was running through his mind at the moment. Since Dalton knew that Kevin wouldn't let this matter rest, and given the huge gap between their relative strengths, he was undoubtedly courting his own death with his actions. Brett, I can already tell that you are destined to avenge me if it comes down to that, Dalton laughed nervously.
Refusing to give up, Brett decided to try and convince him to reconsider one last time. If you already know how this will end, then why are you still being so persistent?
Everyone has irrational pursuits in life, don't you agree? Like a moth to a flame. It's as if there is a voice inside our heads that keeps telling us to do it even against our better judgment,
Dalton reasoned. After all, there were some things that he needed to do no matter what. So what if he died in the end? At the same time, Kevin did not know anything about the two of them meeting up. After leaving the Williams family school, he went to the Reaper Squad's base.
Upon arriving, it seemed that Scott Whitney had been waiting outside for a long time. But what surprised Kevin was that Matthew Thames was also standing there with him. "Mr. Thames, Mr. Whitney," Kevin politely called out. "Looks like you've really broken through to level 7. Not bad, kid. Your mentor really didn't misjudge your talent. To be able to reach this level at your age, you have the right to be proud of yourself." Matthew praised Kevin and nodded approvingly with a smile on his face. It was as if he had suddenly taken a liking to him. "Mr. Thames, time is of the essence. Now is not the time for small talk." The corner of Scott's mouth twitched a few times as he cautiously spoke. "Are you lecturing me?" Matthew asked as he glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. "Not at all, sir," Scott anxiously replied and immediately lowered his head. "All right, let's get straight to the point." Matthew's face instantly became serious and gestured. "Come with us. I would like to show you something." Still puzzled by this, Kevin had no choice but to follow as the three of them went inside the Reaper Squad's base. When they arrived in front of a room, Scott took out a small red metal card and tapped it on the door. Matthew then pressed a long combination of letters on the password lock before opening the door. Seeing such a complicated procedure just to get in, Kevin could not help but wonder what was inside the room. "When you come out of this room later, don't mention anything you see inside to anyone," Matthew warned. Upon hearing this, Kevin wanted to ask something, but Matthew had already pushed him into the room. As soon as he entered, Kevin could smell a strong scent of blood. Moreover, the space inside the room was much wider than he had imagined. As he looked around, there were blood stains all over the walls and the floor. Kevin had never thought that there would be such a terrifying place inside the Reaper Squad's base. Not far away from where he was standing, he saw 4 people with disheveled hair and wounded bodies. Their clothes were tattered and soaked in blood. Meanwhile, their hands and feet were bound by thick iron chains, and the other end of the chains were deeply embedded in the wall. At the moment, these 4 people all looked depleted emotionally. But even though they had suffered such heavy injuries, Kevin could sense that there was still a strong amount of spiritual energy flowing through their veins. Moreover, their bodies were emitting a special kind of pressure. Who were these people, and why were they here? As Brett Stewart tried to cajole Dalton Steele into ending his one-sided war against his former best friend Kevin, Kevin was taken into the depths of the Reaper Squad headquarters where Scott Whitney and Matthew Thames showed him 4 tortured captives whose identities were a mystery to Kevin. Suddenly, Kevin's eyes lit up and locked onto one of them. This man had an unusually tall and robust frame. Although he was covered in wounds and bruises, he still looked like an imposing figure. But beyond his physical appearance, Kevin actually knew who this man was. He was none other than the Southeast School for Natural Medicine's dean, Jeffrey Bowie, whom he had met and even fought with a couple of times before. However, compared to their last encounter, Jeffrey looked much stronger, and his power base had also improved a lot. Judging from the pressure he was emitting, it seemed like he had not only reached the 5th stage of level 5. What's going on here?
"I know what you're thinking, but we didn't hurt them. They are actually our men, and we sent a team who risked their lives just to rescue them from an underground lab. Subsequently, more than a dozen members lost their lives on this secret mission,"
Matthew explained. "What exactly happened to them?" Kevin asked. The last time he saw Jeffrey Bowie, his power base was only at the 1st stage of level 5, but now he had already broken through to the 5th stage. Without taking any high-grade medicinal pills, his rapid improvement was just too fast to believe. Didn't Matthew Thames mention that he was trapped in an underground lab? Why was he taken there in the first place?
"You can go and take a closer look at them, but you'd better be careful."
Matthew cautioned him once again with some concern. Kevin walked hesitantly toward the 4 figures who were all lying down side by side and carefully observed their condition. At the moment, they all seemed to be asleep. With their power bases being practically on par with one another, it was hard to imagine what kind of power could capture 4 5th stage level 5 warriors at the same time and torture them to such an extent. Just then, the man on the leftmost side suddenly woke up. When his bloodshot eyes caught sight of Kevin, he instantly let out a thunderous roar. Without saying a word, he then lunged himself at Kevin. Due to being shackled, this man's range of movement was restricted. Given this, he waved his spiritual energy with all of his might, wanting to break free from the iron chains. While doing so, he continued to roar like a mad beast. This eventually woke the other people up. Provoked by the man's actions, the other three started doing the same thing as well. Seeing that they could not attack Kevin and the other two, the four shackled men started beating each other up instead. Not only did they fight with their fists and legs, but they even bit each other with their mouths. As Kevin watched this terrifying scene unfold, it gave him the impression that there was no longer any trace of humanity in them. It all felt so surreal to him, as if he was in a horror movie. Before things could escalate any further, 4 silver needles shot out from Matthew Thames's hands and accurately struck the necks of the 4 people. The needles seemed to contain some kind of special medicine that put them all into a deep sleep once again. Kevin didn't know how to react.
Do you now see what the Mavericks are capable of doing? This is all their fault.
Matthew interrupted Kevin's words and described the situation. Are you saying that they became like this because they were experimented on by the Mavericks? Kevin asked with some shock.
That's right. What's worse is that they have completely lost themselves. Apart from killing without mercy, they know nothing about pain.
Matthew uttered slowly. If this was true, then the Mavericks had somehow turned all of these people into the perfect killing machine.
The biggest problem is that we don't know how many secret labs the Mavericks have, and how many experts they have captured.
Scott interrupted and then continued.
And it's not just experts that they target. The first person who attacked you just now was actually just a random beggar on the street 2 months ago.
What? How is it possible to become a 5th stage level 5 warrior in just 2 months? None of this made sense to Kevin.
Unfortunately, he is just one of many ordinary people who have been subjected to their cruel experiments over the years. So we really don't know how far they have truly progressed with their plans. We've also tried to conduct some tests and analyze the blood samples of these 4 people, but we haven't been able to find a way to cure them so far.
Scott shook his head as he spoke. But what does this have to do with me? Kevin asked with a puzzled look.
You really don't know?
Scott turned around and looked at Kevin. He then continued.
Think about all the influential families that you have offended since arriving in Washington. The Kesslers, Gaffords, Dawsons, and Robbinses are all part of the Mavericks.
Are you saying that the Mavericks have been targeting me? Kevin asked as his brows furrowed.
Well, it's safe to say that you have emerged as a huge threat to them. Anyway, the ultimate goal of the Mavericks is to build a giant army of genetically engineered experts and use them to suppress the Rangers, and anyone else who opposes them. In order to have a true numbers advantage, they have been capturing not just experts, but even ordinary people.
Matthew carefully explained. So what? Isn't that a simple matter to solve? Since they're breaking the law by going after ordinary people, why can't the government just have them arrested? Kevin retorted casually.
It's not that simple.
Scott sighed unhappily. He then revealed.
With regard to ordinary people, the Mavericks tend to go after people on the lower rungs of society, who can disappear without a trace. Moreover, with the Mavericks comprised of influential people, their higher-ups can easily cover their tracks to absolve them of any crimes.
In the past, Kevin did not think much of these so-called experiments of the Mavericks. But after finding out that someone as powerful as Jeffrey Bowie was easily captured and tortured by them, Kevin really could not imagine what other horrible things the Mavericks were capable of doing. So, the reason why you called me here today is because you want me to deal with the Mavericks on your behalf, right? Kevin asked tentatively, then added, Did you think that I would simply agree to take care of this big mess for you? And even if I did, I don't have the strength to fight the Mavericks alone. Kevin knew his own limitations. How can they expect him to go up against a faction comprised of several influential families with deep roots in Washington all by himself? No matter how strong his power base was, this was an impossible feat to ask of him. Furthermore, Kevin really did not want to get involved in the conflict between the 2 factions.
We know that this matter has put you in a difficult position, but we do not have anyone else we can count on right now.
Matthew tried to persuade him. Stop. I'm not going to fall for your tricks again.
Besides, doesn't the Reaper Squad have a strong foundation? You have many capable experts under your command. How can you say that you don't have anyone to use against the Mavericks? Kevin rebutted, then expressed his sentiments. It's not that I don't want to help you guys, but this is a matter of life and death. I may not be afraid of dying, but a lot of people are counting on me for their own survival. If I die on this mission, who will take care of them? Actually, this matter has a lot to do with some of those people that you're trying to protect, Scott pointed out with a serious face. George Eubanks and Donald Murphy are both from the Rangers, and so is Herman Thompson. He then added, besides, whether it's true or not, many people nowadays believe that you are part of the Rangers. On top of that, after breaking through to level 7 at such a young age, do you think the Mavericks will allow a promising talent like you to rise in power over them? Matthew chimed in. They will stop at nothing to kill you in the cradle before you fully reach your potential. Hearing their ominous words, Kevin gradually fell into silence. He knew that the two of them were trying their best to get him to agree, but they were also telling the truth. Seeing Kevin in deep thought, Matthew slowly walked up to him. He then patted his shoulder and said, just like you said, you have a lot of people to look after. So even if this matter doesn't necessarily concern you as an individual, you have to think for them. While the Mavericks can't easily deal with you, they can easily go after the people who you care about. You don't have to worry about that. As long as I'm alive, the Mavericks won't be able to harm them for the rest of their lives. Kevin snorted and continued. Also, I have another question. If I agree to help you with the Mavericks, does that mean that the Reaper Squad has now become a member of the Rangers? As a government force, the Reaper Squad must never be affiliated with either faction. But given that the Mavericks have gone too far with their actions and pose a great deal to society, we have to find a way to put a stop to these experiments, Scott uttered righteously. But even if we destroy all of their secret labs, the Mavericks will not be eliminated, right? Kevin asked expressionlessly. So what's the point of helping you stop them? By appearing to act on my own, it will only put an even bigger target on my back, and I'll have to keep one eye open when I sleep for the rest of my life. For a moment, Matthew Thames and Scott Whitney did not answer. Kevin's argument made sense, and they could not think of anything else to say to persuade him. The reason why the Mavericks could exist until today was because of their strong foundation. Behind all the families that Kevin had a conflict with, the higher-ups of the Mavericks were all high-ranking officers across the different branches of the military. And such, even the higher-ups in the government could not shake them without Kevin's help. But if Kevin really succeeded in destroying their decades' worth of progress, his future would be one that was doomed to be in dire straits. At the end of the day, there was no need for him to get involved. After all, to put it bluntly, he didn't really owe anyone anything. With Matthew and Scott appealing to Kevin's moral compass, his decision was going to boil down to whether or not his sense of righteousness would prevail. If there is nothing else, I will head back first, Kevin told them plainly.
Wait,
Matthew suddenly called out, then reiterated.
I know that this matter has nothing to do with you, but you are our only hope right now. Time is of the essence, and it is not easy to find someone with your level of strength. He then added, after this matter has been settled, I will speak with the higher-ups in the government to ensure your protection. We will definitely not let the Mavericks cause trouble for you.
Mr. Thames, I'm not a child who can easily be tricked by your words. Kevin shook his head lightly and replied. He then turned around and started walking toward the door.
What if your mentor was the one who asked you to carry out this mission?
Matthew asked with a slight frown. But despite his and Scott's best efforts to reason with him, Kevin still seemed non-committal about helping them. Hearing this, Kevin briefly stopped his footsteps and replied without turning his head. If any mentor said so, I naturally wouldn't object. But the question is, can you find him? As he watched Kevin walk out of the room, a smile suddenly appeared on Matthew's face. Scott then cautiously asked, Sir, how will you find Kevin's mentor? With a profound look in his eyes, Matthew slowly responded, Don't worry. There's no need for that. I strongly believe that Kevin will make the right choice and agree to help us with this matter. That being said, the Reaper Squad will owe him a huge favor for this. For now, go ahead and tell him what to do. If it's within my ability, I'll also do what I can to help him from the sidelines."
"Yes, sir."
Scott nodded in understanding and immediately left the room. At the same time, an old man was quietly observing the scenery outside from the third floor of a mansion in Washington. Just then, the door of the room was gently pushed open from the outside as Mason Zimmerman walked in and lowered his head respectfully.
"Grandpa, were you looking for me?"
Mason nervously asked.
"I heard that you have been working with the Robbins family to deal with a young man named Kevin Williams?"
the old man asked without even turning his head.
"Yes, Grandpa."
Mason didn't dare to hide anything from him.
"Try your best to find out exactly what he's capable of. Also, as far as I know, that young man has a lot of pill recipes in his possession. Find a way to get them before the Herbalist Society does,"
the old man instructed as he put one hand behind his back and stroked his chin with the other.
"Understood."
Although Mason had doubts about this in his heart, he did not dare to question his grandfather.
"As long as you seize this opportunity, you will definitely make a name for yourself in Washington and be remembered for generations to come."
The old man spoke unhurriedly as if he was talking about something insignificant. However, hearing this instantly lit a fire in Mason. This would be how he could get his revenge on Kevin at last. After showing Kevin what had happened to Jeffrey Bowie and the others at the hands of the Mavericks, Matthew Thames asked him to destroy all of their secret labs and halt their plans of building an army of genetically engineered experts. Despite Kevin's reservations about going up against the Mavericks alone, Matthew believed that he would eventually do the right thing and agree to this mission. Meanwhile, Mason Zimmerman was confronted by his grandfather, knowing that he had been working with the Robbins family against Kevin. When he was urged to make a name for himself in Washington by drawing out Kevin and obtaining his pill formulas, Mason thought deeply about his grandfather's words. After all, who didn't want to be immortalized in history and be remembered as one of the great figures of his generation? At the same time, wasn't it easier said than done to achieve this? During his grandfather's time, it was common for men to enlist in the military and fight for their country. As long as they came back alive, these decorated war veterans could use their status as stepping stones for their future rise in Washington. Nowadays, the landscape was much different. Although there were still some small conflicts from time to time, various systems had been set in place to avoid another catastrophic war of such magnitude, making it difficult for the current generation to make contributions that would change the course of history through the same path as the ones before them. Because of this, while Mason Zimmerman was intrigued by his grandfather's words, he also couldn't help but wonder about the golden opportunity that he was referring to. Was stopping Kevin really that big of a deal? However, even though he had questions, Mason knew better than to doubt his grandfather's wisdom. After all, as the one who built their empire, all of the Zimmerman family's members could only lower their heads before him.
"If you have nothing else to tell me, you can leave first."
The old man waved his hand without turning his back, then added,
"As for how to force Kevin into handling over his pill formulas, I'm sure you can come up with a way yourself. I won't interfere in this matter."
"Yes, Grandpa." Mason lowered his head again before slowly leaving the room. After he left, the old man suddenly let out a long sigh.
"My family has been patiently waiting for this moment for many years. It's time for us to spread our wings and show everyone who should be on top."
The old man's eyes shone with a brilliant light as a terrifying aura burst out from his body. Half a day passed very quickly. After Kevin returned to the Williams family school, he sat alone on the sofa and lowered his head. While staring intently at the glass of wine in his hand, no one knew what he was thinking. Just then, Jordan Black suddenly walked over slowly and politely informed Kevin.
"Mr. Williams, someone outside is looking for you."
Kevin only reacted after a while and raised his head to ask in puzzlement, "Who is it?"
"Her name is Olivia Rafferty,"
Jordan answered respectfully. "Let her in," Kevin nodded. Kevin hurried to greet Olivia, but he seemed to have forgotten that the door was made of transparent glass. With a loud bang, he hit his head on the door. Surprised by this, Jordan immediately checked on him. "Mr. Williams, are you—" Before he could finish his words, Kevin covered his forehead and waved him off. "Don't worry, I'm fine."
After that, he left the room. When Kevin arrived at the parking lot, he instantly saw Olivia Rafferty, who was wearing a pink jacket today. As she leaned against the front of a white BMW, her figure could be seen at a glance under the warm sunlight. After seeing Kevin, a huge smile appeared on Olivia's face. "Looks like you've been really busy these days. How have you been?" Olivia greeted. "What are you doing here?" Kevin asked with a slight frown. Even though they had become good friends since the herbalism competition, Kevin knew that Olivia had started to develop some feelings for him, which made things a bit uncomfortable. After all, he was happily married and only had Lily in his heart. Hearing this, Olivia's expression changed slightly, and there was a trace of sadness in her eyes as she responded. "Does there have to be a reason for me to come and find you? Do you really not want to see me?" "I'm sorry. It's not what I meant. It's just that I have a lot of things going on in my mind today." Kevin stammered, as he also did not know how to express his current feelings. The truth was that he had been a little absent-minded since leaving the Reaper Squad's base earlier today. Ever since he became an expert, Kevin had always paid attention to the benefits of doing things whenever he had an important decision to make. After witnessing what had happened to Jeffrey Bowie and the others at the hands of the Mavericks, he quickly determined that it would not be beneficial to him to intervene. Because of this, he immediately dismissed Matthew Thames's request, maintaining his stance until he left. However, he had been thinking about this matter deeply in his heart since then. As he continued to weigh whether or not to accept the mission, Kevin was afraid of ending up like those 4 people who seemed to have lost all of their humanity. Seeing Kevin lower his head with a bothered expression on his face, Olivia could not help but ask with concern, "Kevin, why do you look so troubled? Did something bad happen earlier today?" After a few minutes, Kevin finally let out a heavy sigh and shook his head. "It's fine. I should be able to handle that matter," Kevin stuttered unconvincingly. "It's fine if you don't want to talk about it, but I came here to tell you that today is my birthday," Olivia eagerly revealed, then added, "So, how are we going to celebrate?" "Today is your birthday?" Kevin looked up at her in surprise and said awkwardly, "Happy birthday. I'm sorry I didn't know about it in advance. Why don't I treat you to a meal right now?" A smile appeared on Olivia's face as she playfully chortled. "Okay, but wherever you're taking me, the food better be good. Otherwise, you won't hear the end of it today." Kevin snorted. With billions of dollars to his name, did she think that he couldn't afford to treat her to an expensive meal with such a fortune? "You drive." Without waiting for him to respond, Olivia threw her car keys to Kevin and entered the passenger side of her BMW. Washington, D.C. was indeed the busiest city in the country. It was not even rush hour yet when they found themselves stuck in heavy traffic. Unable to think of any topic to talk about while waiting, neither of them took the lead to break the silence. Given this, the atmosphere gradually became more and more awkward as the minutes passed. Fortunately, Kevin eventually found a shortcut along the way, and they soon arrived at the Vast Hotel, which was the most famous hotel in the entire city. At the moment, there weren't many parking spaces left in the hotel's parking lot, but just as Kevin had found an empty spot and was about to park in it, a red Ferrari suddenly rushed over, seemingly without any intention of slowing down. Seeing this from the corner of his eye, Kevin's calm expression did not change at all. With his current power base, even if this car was going at full speed, he could still use his spiritual energy to forcefully stop it in time. However, there was no need for this, as the driver of the Ferrari managed to step on the brakes at the last second, causing his car's tires to screech loudly against the ground before finally stopping. Seeing that the front bumper of the Ferrari was just less than a foot away from the BMW side door, Kevin frowned slightly. He instantly remembered the incident at the Williams family school's parking lot earlier that day. "Here we go again," Kevin muttered to himself. As expected, the man driving the Ferrari quickly got out of his car. He then pointed at where Kevin was seated and cursed. "Are you blind? That was incredibly reckless of you. You're lucky I managed to step on the brakes. Otherwise, if you hit my car, you probably wouldn't have been able to pay me for the damages." Since Kevin was already used to these types of situations, the man's disdainful words didn't bother him. By now, he had learned that it was sometimes better to take the high road in order to avoid unnecessary trouble. However, in contrast to Kevin's calm demeanor, Olivia's violent temper suddenly rose as she hurriedly unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car. "If you have any guts, why don't you repeat what you just said to my face? I'm not afraid of teaching you a lesson by dealing some damage to your lousy car." Olivia fired back assertively as she crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked him dead in the eye.
"Are you serious? Open your eyes wide and take a closer look. This is a limited edition Ferrari. There are no more than 10 cars like this in the entire world. With the same amount of money, I can buy more than a few of your little BMWs."
The man boasted while pointing to the front hood of the car. It was as if he was afraid that Olivia would not be able to recognize the brand of his sports car. "Is it really that impressive?" Olivia glared at him and warned, "If you dare to insult me again, I will make sure that you'll regret your words." Although this Ferrari was rare, with the Rafferty family's strength and fortune, Olivia knew that she could easily afford one.
"There's no need for a beauty like you to get so upset. Instead, let me take you for a spin. You'll see just how special this car is."
The man suddenly changed his tone as he spoke, thinking that he could charm his way into Olivia's heart. However, hearing this only made Olivia more furious. She then rolled up her sleeves and prepared to charge toward the Ferrari. With the situation getting more tense, Kevin immediately got out of the car to stop her. "Calm down," Kevin shouted as he grabbed Olivia's arm and pulled her back. He then added in a low voice, "There's no need to waste time getting angry with this person. Don't let him ruin your mood." "Get out of the way. I want to teach this dog a lesson today." Olivia ignored his plea and tried to break free from his hold. "Forget him. Besides, today is your birthday. Let's just look for another parking spot so that we can go to dinner," Kevin advised earnestly. After taking a moment to let her anger subside, Olivia finally calmed down. She then glanced fiercely at the man and sneered, Luckily for you, I don't want to cause any trouble for him." However, instead of moving on from this matter, the man continued to look at the two of them condescendingly. He then glanced at the BMW behind them and scoffed.
"It's good to know that you two aren't that short-sighted. If my beloved car was really damaged, you would have to deal with the consequences."
Seeing that the man's words had upset Olivia once more, Kevin frowned slightly and took the initiative to address him first. "Be careful of what you say next. Otherwise, you're the one who must deal with the consequences if you don't let us go on our way. Besides, you were the one who started all this trouble in the first place. If an accident had really occurred, you should be the one to blame for it." The man spat at Kevin with disdain.
"Who do you think you are? From the looks of it, you're just a coward who has been living off of a woman. Otherwise, with just this lousy BMW of yours, how could you date such a beauty like her?"
The man became more and more arrogant. He felt as if he had completely seen through the relationship between the two of them. "If you know what's good for you, this is your last chance to walk away peacefully. But if you continue to speak nonsense like this, I won't mind giving you a taste of your own medicine," Kevin retorted as his face gradually darkened. Just a few moments ago, he thought by lowering his pride and taking the high road this matter could be resolved without causing any trouble. However, he was not expecting this man to act so arrogantly and disrespectfully toward them.
"My face is right here. Hit me with your best shot. That is, if you have the guts to even do so."
The man boldly turned his head to the side and pointed to his cheek. He then added,
"Before you decide, let me introduce myself first. My name is Marcus Watford. If my last name sounds familiar, it's because my father is the president of the Orion Group."
Kevin was stunned for a moment, and then his expression changed. Suddenly, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry after finding out that this man was Terry Watford's son.
"What are you still standing there for? Did I scare you off after discovering my identity? Don't make me look down on your pathetic existence even more."
Marcus continued to taunt Kevin, hoping to humiliate him further in front of Olivia. "All right, you have been duly warned, but since you're really asking for it, I don't mind teaching you a good lesson today on behalf of your father." Kevin nodded as he flashed a mischievous smile. With that, Kevin walked slowly towards Marcus and slapped him across the face. Olivia Rafferty visited Kevin to inform him that it was her birthday. Given this, Kevin awkwardly offered to treat her to a meal and drove her BMW to the Vast Hotel. But just as they were about to park, a man driving a Ferrari almost crashed into them. While Kevin initially opted to take the high road, Olivia angrily confronted the man about the incident. Despite Kevin's efforts to defuse the tension, the man refused to let them go. Revealing himself to be Terry Watford's son, Marcus Watford persistently dared Kevin to hit him. In order to teach him a lesson, Kevin slapped him. Even though Kevin had dialed down his strength to a very low intensity, his slap still caused Marcus Watford to spin on the spot and stumble backward. Even with the support of his Ferrari, he was too dazed to steady himself and eventually fell to the ground with a thud. When Kevin and Olivia saw his face, there was a visible slap mark on one of his swollen cheeks, and blood flowed out from his nostrils. Due to his dizziness, Marcus had to shake his head a few times before finally being able to see things clearly again. He then held onto his car to slowly prop himself back up. However, he could still feel his head throbbing heavily from Kevin's slap. Because of this, Marcus grew so angry that his body started to tremble. He then pointed at Kevin in disbelief and roared, You really hit me?" Didn't he just tell Kevin that he was Terry Watford's son? Given his father's reputation as the Orion Group's president, even government officials had to be polite to him. As such, he did not expect Kevin to be so rude. Wasn't this man just living off this woman's wealth? You asked me to hit you multiple times. With you being so persistent, who am I to refuse your wishes? I simply accommodated your request. Kevin explained with a simple and honest smile. You better be prepared for what's coming. Because of what you just did to me, I will not let you go until I have the last laugh. Marcus fumed as he took out his phone and called someone. I was attacked by some piece of trash just now. Send some help over to the Vast Hotel immediately. When he heard the answer on the other end of the phone, he replied, What? You're eating in the same hotel and you're bringing some men over right away? That's great. I'll wait for you here. After hanging up the phone, Marcus pointed at Kevin again, but this time he was much more confident. He then sneered, If you have the guts, just wait here. Someone will come and deal with you shortly. Okay, no problem. Kevin did not know whether to laugh or cry, so he nodded and replied. He never thought that Terry Watford's son would turn out to be so immature. However, after thinking about it carefully, it made sense. Someone like Terry was usually too busy with the Orion Group's daily affairs to still have time to discipline his son. As long as he did not cause any trouble, Marcus could have everything that he wanted given to him. Thinking of this, Kevin promised himself that when he and Lily were ready to have kids in the future, their children would definitely not be raised in such a way. Not knowing what Kevin was thinking, Marcus interrupted his train of thought. What the hell are you thinking about? Don't tell me you're trying to find a way out of this. You should have thought about that before slapping me earlier. Kevin shook his head helplessly. He didn't really want to get into a conflict with Marcus at the moment. At most, he could just call his father over and say a few polite words to settle this matter. However, seeing that Kevin was still silent, Marcus thought he was afraid of what was about to happen. Just as he wanted to laugh about this, he felt a sharp pain coming from the corner of his mouth. It hurt so much that he grimaced in pain. You should rest first, Kevin remarked as he looked at him with some concern. However, Marcus didn't take too kindly to this. When he heard Kevin lecturing him like an older brother, the anger in his heart instantly rose as he scoffed. Why do you care about me all of a sudden? Before Kevin could respond, he heard a burst of hurried footsteps. He then looked over and saw a group of young men in suits quickly walking toward them. The person in the lead was none other than Kyle Thompson. Beside him was his fiancée, Anastasia Owens, whom Kevin had also met before. Kyle, please help me, Marcus uttered faintly. By now, his cheek was completely swollen, so he could not speak clearly. What's going on here? Kyle asked in surprise. Well, Marcus suddenly found himself at a loss for words and simply pointed at Kevin. Although the Thompson family's business was not as big compared to the Orion Group, Herman Thompson was a prominent figure in Washington who still had many connections with key positions in the government. Aside from this, Marcus Watford had heard that the Thompson family was being supported by a powerful expert, who also happened to work closely with his father and the Orion Group. Therefore, their families could be said to be allies under the same umbrella. More importantly, since the same expert had taken Kyle Thompson under his wing, Terry Watford urged his son to train under him.
"Don't worry, this matter will be settled soon,"
Kyle reassured Marcus and patted his shoulder. Hearing this, Marcus calmed down a little and gave Kevin a spiteful look. Meanwhile, Kyle Thompson sighed slightly and slowly turned his head around with a heart filled with helplessness. Knowing that Marcus was too self-absorbed for his own good and relied on his father for everything, Kyle was not surprised to find out that he had stirred up some trouble again. Despite this, he had no choice but to stick up for him. After all, since the Thompson family's business in Washington had to rely on the support of the Orion Group, Herman asked him to treat Marcus like his little brother. But when Kyle saw Kevin and realized who Marcus had just offended, he was petrified, and his eyes widened in horror, as if he had just seen a ghost. At that moment, Kevin was also staring at him with a smile on his face. He was the first to speak. "Kyle, it's good to know that you're doing pretty well these days. Looks like you've also started to take some men under your wing. Am I right?" Hearing the dissatisfaction in Kevin's tone, Kyle's hands began to tremble.
"Who the hell do you think you are? How dare you speak to our brother like that?"
One of the men who had been following Kyle scoffed. However, Kevin did not seem to hear or care about what this man had said and simply kept his gaze fixed on Kyle. As for Olivia Rafferty, she didn't think much of these young men either. Not to mention the fact that Kevin could crush them all with one finger, but she could also bring in her own backup to scare them off with just a phone call.
"Kyle, say something,"
another person prodded Kyle as he looked at Kevin vigilantly. At the same time, Anastasia Owens had also noticed that her fiancé was acting strange, so she tugged the corner of his shirt to call his attention. Only then did Kyle come back to his senses. After taking a deep breath, he slowly walked over to Kevin, knelt on the ground, and lowered his head before him. He then uttered earnestly,
"Mr. Williams, I'm sorry for all of this. It's not what you think it is."
However, Kevin only lowered his eyes and snorted coldly at him. Watching this scene unfold before their eyes, Marcus Watford and the others were all stunned. A few of them even subconsciously rubbed their eyes, thinking that they were seeing things. The only one who could remain calm was Anastasia Owens. Although they had only met briefly once, it was enough for her to get a vague sense of the relationship between Kyle and Kevin. Despite this, she also felt a strong sense of anger in her heart. How could someone of Kyle's status kneel down before Kevin in front of everyone like this? Weren't all of these young men supposed to look up to him? "Kyle, what are you doing? Get up right now," Anastasia scolded.
"I know what I'm doing."
Kyle did not even turn back his head to her and shouted,
"Marcus, get over here and kneel down to beg for Mr. Williams' forgiveness."
When these words came out of his mouth, all of the young men who came with him were at a loss for words. What was going on? Seeing their brother kneeling down before this man was already shocking enough, and now he wanted Marcus to do the same thing. Why was Kyle begging this ordinary-looking guy to forgive them in the first place? Who exactly was this man?
"Marcus, don't blame me for not warning you. If you don't ask for his forgiveness today, you will surely face your father's wrath when you go home,"
Kyle ordered with a stern tone. However, Anastasia wasn't having any of this as she stared at Kevin with some hostility. "Marcus, don't listen to him." Anastasia took charge of the situation and then said, "Kyle, show some spine and get up from the ground. Stop embarrassing me." Kyle usually listened to her words very attentively, but today he completely ignored her. In his mind, he had to make an exception. After all, this was a matter of life and death. As Marcus stood and listened to what the two of them were advising him to do, he believed Kyle's words more. After all, his father had been mentioned, and Kyle was not a person who spoke without reason. Meanwhile, Anastasia took a deep breath to suppress her fury. She quickly walked over to Kyle and tried to pull him up from the ground. "Why are you being such a coward? What is there to be afraid of? He's not even from here." Anastasia seethed. Her chest kept rising and falling violently as if she was about to lose her composure. "Anastasia, you... let go of me!" Kyle replied weakly as he brushed her off. He did not even have the courage to raise his head to look at Kevin. "All right, since you are so afraid of him, then I will go and see what's so amazing about him today." Anastasia's tone had become completely glum. A cold chill emitted from her body, seemingly turning the surrounding air into a mist that wrapped around Kevin. Seeing this, Olivia Rafferty looked at her in disbelief and exclaimed, "The Blood Shadow Force? Are you a member of the Owens family? You have some discerning eyes. How do you know about my family?" Anastasia retorted as she glanced at Olivia with some surprise. Olivia remarked, "Ever since your previous family had went missing, it has been several decades since the Blood Shadow Force was last seen among the talents of the Owens family. Looking at your power base, you must be at the initial stage of level 5. What a pity." "Why is that a pity?" Anastasia could not help but ask curiously. She did not understand why this woman was so familiar with the matters of her family. "The Blood Shadow Force will inevitably cause your hands to be stained with blood. If you can't control its power, you will become like a wild beast that only knows how to kill, just like the previous head of your family. When that time comes, you will completely lose your sense of humanity," Olivia explained. When he heard this, Kevin immediately thought of Jeffrey Bowie and the others he had encountered at the Reaper Squad's base. Could it be that the experiments of the Mavericks are closely related to the Blood Shadow Force that the Owens family is known for? Kevin thought to himself, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to see that day." Anastasia snorted coldly and threw a kick toward Kevin's head. Suddenly, Kevin felt a fierce wind blowing against his face. At the same time, with her cold spiritual energy wrapped around his body, he felt as if he was trapped inside a freezer, which slightly affected his focus. "You overestimate yourself," Kevin thundered in a deep voice. He then stretched out his hand and grabbed Anastasia's ankle. However, while he was able to block her attack, he couldn't help but frown slightly. Her leg felt so cold, and her bones were so tough. It was as if he had caught a giant block of ice. In order to break free from Kevin, Anastasia quickly tried to poke him in the eyes. "Your moves are quite fierce," Kevin exclaimed as he quickly let go of her leg. Because Kyle Thompson was still kneeling right in front of him, it was impossible for Kevin to use his protective spiritual energy barrier to push Anastasia away. "Out of respect for Kyle, I don't want to fight you, so don't force me," Kevin warned her grimly. After all, Anastasia was Kyle's fiancée. If he hurt her, how would he explain his actions to Herman Thompson? "What if I force your hand?" Anastasia dared him recklessly. She then turned around and rushed toward Kevin, wanting to tackle him with her shoulder. Although Kevin saw through her movements, he did not have any defensive posture and allowed her to hit his chest. A second later, a muffled sound was heard from the impact. However, the result was not what Anastasia had expected. Kevin did not move at all, while she was forced to take 2 steps back. A look of disbelief flashed across Anastasia Owens' eyes. Despite being very confident in her own strength, Kevin seemed to be as unshakable as a mountain. "So you are an expert as well," Anastasia finally realized. Without warning, she then threw a kick that went straight between Kevin's legs. This kind of a dirty trick almost caught him off guard. Luckily, he managed to grab her ankle just in time. Otherwise, given the strength that he felt, who knows if he would still have the ability to have a child in the future. "It seems that if I don't teach you a lesson, you won't know what's good for you," Kevin chided with some anger. This battle might be one that would complicate every aspect of Kevin's future. Kevin's parking lot fight with Marcus Watford had him beckoning his protector and friend Kyle Thompson, who defended Kevin rather than Marcus, much to Kyle's fiancée Anastasia Owens' annoyance. It was she who started to battle Kevin and was shocked at his powers. While Kevin tried to take the high road by merely blocking or resisting Oliver's strikes, Anastasia Owens had simply gone too far this time. "Teach me a lesson? I admit you have some strength, but with your performance so far, aren't you afraid of losing your tongue by saying such big words?" Anastasia sneered with a sour expression on her face. As soon as she finished speaking, Anastasia jumped up high into the air and then shot toward Kevin with a biting cold wind. But before her kick landed, Kevin was already one step ahead as he narrowed his eyes and casually struck her knee with his right hand. With a flick of his finger, Kevin then released a wave of spiritual energy that pierced through Anastasia's shoulder. Suddenly, Anastasia's expression changed drastically as her pupils shrank to the size of a needle tip. Even though there were no visible wounds or bleeding, both of her arms had seemingly been immobilized. Seeing this display of strength stunned Marcus Watford and the others. How did Kevin manage to suppress Anastasia so easily?
"Anastasia, please stop. You are no match for Mr. Williams,"
Kyle Thompson advised his fiancée with concern. "Let this serve as a stern warning. Don't think that reaching level 5 makes you unbeatable. There is always someone stronger than you, so being arrogant and impulsive will only hurt you in the end." Kevin slowly lectured her. "Today I did not even care about this small matter. You were the one who made an issue out of it and stubbornly insisted on intervening. For the sake of Kyle, I will just treat this as a small lesson for you. But if you offend me again, don't blame me for not showing mercy." "My fiancé knelt down in front of you in public, while you only looked at him with your ugly face. How could I just stand by and allow him to be humiliated like that?" Anastasia retorted.
"I was the one apologizing to Mr. Williams. I know that you only did it because you care about me, but you didn't have to attack him,"
Kyle uttered with a pained expression. Just then, Olivia Rafferty sighed faintly. "Can we all just move on now? It's my birthday after all." But before Kevin could respond, a familiar voice sounded.
"What are you doing here?"
Everyone looked over and saw Tyler Dawn walking over casually. He had been observing Marcus Watford from afar for some time.
"What happened to your face? It took me a long time before I even recognized you," Tyler said.
The KWTD Corporation and the Orion Group were currently two of the biggest companies in the country. Thanks to Kevin, Tyler Dawn and Terry Watford not only knew each other professionally but also developed a very deep friendship. Given this, Tyler Dawn had a business meeting to attend at the Vast Hotel earlier. Once it was over, he just happened to pass by the parking lot to get to his car when he overheard the commotion. Since Marcus Watford's face had swollen to the point that he was no longer able to speak clearly, he could only point helplessly at Kevin. Tyler looked in the direction where his finger was pointing and his face changed dramatically when he saw Kevin. He quickly walked up to him with a smile on his face.
"I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. These guys were blocking my view, so I didn't see that you were standing here,"
Tyler explained with a laugh. "It's fine. I just ran into some trouble earlier. Mr. Watford here was being a little too arrogant, so I had to teach him a lesson on behalf of his father. After that, I had to deal with Kyle's fiancée as well. Anyway, both matters have already been settled," Kevin briefed him.
"They must have offended you if it had come down to that."
Tyler then turned around and yelled at Marcus.
"What the hell are you still standing there for? Hurry up and apologize to Mr. Williams."
When these words came out, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. If Tyler addressed this man respectfully as Mr. Williams, then didn't that mean that Kevin was even more prominent than he? Seeing that Marcus had not moved an inch from where he was standing, Tyler gritted his teeth and carefully advised him once again.
"Let me remind you of one thing. If Mr. Williams doesn't forgive you today, you will face your father's wrath when you go back home tonight."
Marcus Watford looked at Kevin in confusion. From the looks of it, it seemed that the two of them were about the same age. Despite this, Kyle knelt down before him earlier, while Tyler was also very respectful toward him. Moreover, if both of them mentioned his father, didn't that mean that all three of them were connected to this man in some way? After having some time to think, he suddenly thought to himself,
"Could he be the young expert that my father was referring to?"
Upon realizing that this was indeed very likely the case, Marcus couldn't help but shudder. He hurriedly rushed toward Kevin and knelt down before him as Kyle had. However, since he couldn't talk, he could only make some muffled noises. Kevin slightly raised his hand and gestured. "All right, get up now. You have to change your attitude to avoid embarrassing your father in public." He then turned his head to address Kyle. "After bringing your fiancée back to her place, go home and wait for me. I will go there after I settle some other matters." Kyle secretly cursed in his heart. However, since he did not have the courage to refuse, he could only smile bitterly and agree. "Yes, Mr. Williams. If there is nothing else, do you want to ride back with me to the company and talk business?" Tyler eagerly invited. "Talk business? I haven't even eaten lunch yet. You really are a man who knows nothing about hunger," Kevin joked. "All right. Anyway, I happen to own some shares in this hotel, so I will call the manager shortly to make arrangements. Order whatever you want," Tyler replied with a smile. His eyes then paused on Olivia Rafferty for a few seconds before giving Kevin a meaningful look. Kevin saw through his thoughts with one look and waved him off. "It's not what you think." "I didn't say anything. Anyway, I'm leaving now," Tyler quipped before walking toward his car. Since the matter with these people had already been settled, Kevin left the parking lot with Olivia and headed into the vast hotel. Meanwhile, under Kyle Thompson's instructions, the group dispersed and went their separate ways. After receiving Tyler's instructions, the staff members of the vast hotel did not dare to be neglectful in the slightest. As soon as they entered, Kevin and Olivia were immediately brought to a private dining room. The hotel manager then personally poured the wine and served the dishes for the two of them. However, the manager did not do this because of Tyler's phone call. Rather, it was because he happened to witness the commotion in the parking lot through his office window. How could he offend someone who had stood up against Marcus Watford and was deeply respected by Tyler Dawn? Even if he didn't know exactly who Kevin was, he knew that he had to do everything in his power to make him comfortable. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Kevin and Olivia had just finished their meal. Knowing that Kevin still had other things to deal with, Olivia asked him to drive her home soon after. "Due to the commotion earlier, today's meal was not as pleasant as it should have been. So remember, you still owe me a birthday present," Olivia teased before entering the Rafferty family's mansion. Kevin shook his head and chuckled. He then remembered what he had said to Kyle and went straight to the Thompson family's mansion. At the moment, Herman Thompson was sitting in the study while Kyle was standing by his side. Seemed like the two of them were waiting for Kevin to arrive. When he finally did, Kevin entered the room without any hesitation, as Herman had already instructed his men to let him in when he arrived. The moment Herman saw Kevin, he immediately stood up from his chair and apologized. "Kevin, I'm so sorry about what happened today. I know that Anastasia was way out of line, but I hope you don't take it to heart." "Don't worry, Mr. Thompson. I know that she was just trying to defend Kyle, so I don't hold any grudge against her or your family. Anyway, the main reason why I came here this time is because of Kyle." Upon hearing this, Herman's heart tightened slightly. He then asked, "Did my grandson do something to offend you as well?" "It's not that. Rather, I feel that he is currently facing too many distractions. If he continues like this, I'm afraid that he will easily lose sight of the bigger picture." Kevin expressed his thoughts with some concern. Herman Thompson looked at his grandson silently. Since returning to Washington, he had been busy dealing with several matters to reestablish his family's foundation in the city. But at the same time, this had indeed come at the expense of neglecting Kyle's situation. "It's all my fault, Kevin. Please don't punish my grandson for my negligence," Herman pleaded while placing all of the blame on himself. "Mr. Thompson, don't be so nervous. I was just concerned that if I didn't say anything, he might end up wasting his potential in the future," Kevin slowly explained. He then turned to Kyle again and asked, "Anyway, didn't you guys always want him to follow me? Kyle, let me ask you now, are you still willing to take me as your mentor?" Turning their gazes to one another, Herman and Kyle were both completely stunned by the turn of events. They initially thought that Kevin had come here to denounce them. After they regained their senses, the two of them were immediately filled with excitement. The truth was that Kevin had been wanting to ask Kyle to join his side for a while now, especially since he knew that, as an ordinary person, his strength was far from where it needed to be. After all, the Thompson family was one of his most trusted allies in Washington. Given this, Herman Thompson was already very old. Even though Kevin could refine various pills to prolong his life, he couldn't escape Father Time forever. This meant that Kyle would have to take over as head of the Thompson family sooner or later. As such, Kevin needed to train him to become a worthy successor that he could rely on in the future. Furthermore, there were so many combat techniques, pill formulas, and other things that were recorded in the secret book. But while learning should ideally be an endless pursuit, Kevin felt that he had already gotten everything that he needed from the secret book. Still, Kevin could not bear to let such a precious item be covered in dust, so he figured that it was time for him to find someone to pass it on to.
"What are you still standing there for? Hurry up and thank Kevin!"
Herman was the first to react and immediately called out to his grandson. When Kyle finally came back to his senses, he excitedly stepped forward to shake Kevin's hand and respectfully uttered,
"Mr. Williams, please accept me as your student."
Kevin took a deep breath and said seriously, "I accept. As your mentor, I hope to guide you back to the right path and help you reach your potential."
"As your student, I will remember every one of your teachings and take them to heart,"
Kyle promised wholeheartedly. "Pack your bags. You will stay with me from now on," Kevin instructed earnestly.
"Yes, Mr. Williams."
Kyle nodded in understanding. He had no qualms about this arrangement. Kevin then took out 2 pills and turned around and handed them over to Herman. "Mr. Thompson, consume these 2 pills 15 days from now. They can extend your life by 10 years, Kevin told him kindly.
"Thank you, Kevin,"
Herman exclaimed as he took the pills and held them close to his heart like a precious gift. Seeing this, Kyle was also very happy. As long as his grandfather lived, the Thompson family would continue to exist in peace. After this, Kevin didn't stay at the Thompson family's mansion for too long. He then took Kyle with him as they left. As Herman stroked his long beard, he couldn't wipe the smile off his face. Since meeting Kevin in St. Louis, he had always wanted Kyle to be mentored by him. It was a pity that Kevin rejected his request at that time. So now that his wish had finally been fulfilled, how could he not be overjoyed at this moment? Besides, he knew that his grandson would definitely learn a lot from Kevin. In the future, he wouldn't have to worry about having a worthy successor in his family. On the way back to his mansion, Kevin had been thinking about the best approach to start teaching Kyle. After all, the things recorded in the secret book were a lot to take in, especially for someone like Kyle, who was just an ordinary person without any foundation for developing his power base yet. Given this, Kevin knew that he had to be patient and take things slow with him. When the 2 of them arrived at the mansion, Kevin suddenly placed his hand in front of Kyle's chest, just as they were about to reach the front door.
"What's wrong, Mr. Williams?"
Kyle asked curiously. Kevin's facial expression turned glum. He then whispered in a low voice, "Follow me and stay close. No matter what happens, do not panic."
"Understood."
Kyle nodded. Although he didn't fully understand what Kevin had meant by this, he could tell from his expression that something was wrong. With that, Kevin slowly walked toward the door with Kyle right behind him. When he gently placed his hand on the heavy door, it suspiciously swung open right away. What grave danger might await them behind it? After agreeing to take on Kyle Thompson as his protege, Kevin gave Herman Thompson 2 pills that could extend his lifespan by 10 years. Both of these developments were stunning to both Herman and Kyle, but they were both very excited. On the way back to the mansion, Kevin considered all the ways he could take an ordinary person like Kyle under his wing. When they arrived, Kevin very slowly opened the door. Even Lily didn't know that Kevin had a habit of tying a very tiny red thread on the door handle whenever he went out. This habit was left behind when Kevin lived under Dorothy's roof to prevent her from entering his and Lily's room without his knowledge. However, Kevin had just noticed that not only had the red thread disappeared, but even the door handle had been clearly tampered with. Troy Evans and the others had not returned from the school, but even if they had returned, they would have not done anything like this to the door handle. The only explanation was that someone had come here uninvited. The mansion that Tyler Dawn had found for him had a very strong security system. If an ordinary thief went in, no matter how careful they were, they would trigger an alarm that was impossible to circumvent. Furthermore, when Kevin checked the situation of the door handle, it was clear that the internal structure of the door had been broken by someone using spiritual energy. There were no visible flaws from the outside. Only when he twisted the handle did he find that it had become loosened. Kevin slowly brought Kyle Thompson into the room, sticking close to the wall. After entering the room, his spiritual energy instantly covered the entire house. Suddenly, Kevin frowned slightly. There was no one in the house? "Sir, what happened?" Kyle Thompson lowered his voice and carefully looked around the room. "Someone broke in, but it looks like they've already left." Kevin frowned slightly and walked upstairs. He checked the floors and the rooms one by one. Not to mention people, he did not even find any visible clues anywhere. Clearly, someone had deliberately cleaned up after themselves. The person who came was no ordinary person, Kevin thought to himself with a gloomy face. However, he did not understand. If someone wanted to cause trouble for him, why did they not come for him directly and instead break into his house while he wasn't there to do something sneaky? "Looks like I have to find somewhere else to stay." While Kevin was thinking, he called Troy Evans and the others and then called Tyler Dawn, who was in the middle of a meeting, back to the house. "What happened, Mr. Williams?" Tyler looked at Troy Evans and the others in the foyer of the mansion with unfriendly expressions. "Someone broke into the house while I was gone," Kevin said with great dissatisfaction. "It seems that some people have lost their patience and want to attack us. Tyler, do you have another house where we can stay, somewhere more secure, like in the mountains or on a lake?" Hearing this, Tyler thought for a moment. As the CEO of the KWTD Corporation, his assets were beyond an ordinary person's imagination. However, there were too many properties in his name to think of one right away, so he had to think. "I remember that a few years ago I worked with Big Mountain Real Estate on the construction of some new developments. After the completion of the construction, the chairman of the company gave me a lake house. It's on Swan Lake." Tyler explained, having finally thought of one of the many houses he had to offer near the city. "Are you sure it's secluded and safe?" Kevin asked seriously. "There are no other houses or apartment buildings nearby." The reason he asked this question was because he heard the name Swan Lake. Usually places like this were popular tourist areas. Kevin had to be careful about this matter. He was not afraid that someone would be foolish enough to try to come after him directly, but it did not mean that the people around him would not be plotted against. Besides, he was a person after all. He was not an omnipotent god. Lily had been taken away many times in Chicago, which made him think hard. He could not give his enemies any more opportunities to take advantage of her or of any of the people in his inner circle. So he decided to bring his parents and Lily over. "I'm not sure if you know, Mr. Williams. Swan Lake covers an area of several hundred square miles. There are many buildings around it, but my house is on an island, and I can assure you that it is very secure." He added, "Also, there are a lot of tall trees all around it protecting the privacy of the house. There is only one bridge to get onto the island." Tyler then took out his phone to check the situation of the lake house. "In the winter, the island is often blocked by thick fog. Even with binoculars, one can't see it clearly from the mainland." Hearing this, Kevin nodded his head in satisfaction. "All right. There is no time to lose. All of you go and pack up. We will move there tonight." Biting his lip, Kevin added again, "We need to take every possible precaution." "No problem," Tyler answered easily. Under Tyler's lead, Kevin and the others left the mansion one after another. As soon as they left, several cars parked around the house suddenly started moving at the same time. One of the drivers in one of the cars made a call. "Sir, Kevin seems to have found out that we are monitoring him. It seems that he is moving locations." As long as he is still in D.C., I would like to see where they will move to." A cold voice came from the other end of the phone. "Find a few reliable people to follow him. No matter what, keep an eye on Kevin." "Understood." After the driver hung up the phone, he sent a few more text messages. When they reached Swan Lake, it was indeed as Tyler Dawn had described. Even though it was close to 5 o'clock, the center of the island was still shrouded in a layer of fog from the shore. Under Tyler's arrangement, someone had quickly come over and cleaned the house inside and outside. The house was now all ready, as if a new owner was ready to move in at any time. Kevin walked around the island and looked out at a black car on the bridge with narrowed eyes. The corner of his mouth curled into a smile. "Your nose is quite sharp," Kevin snorted coldly under his breath. He then turned around and walked into the house. Tonight, Dustin Newman and Barry Damon will be on the same team. Amanda Perry and Violet Sweeney will be on the same team. They will take turns as lookouts of the entire island. Troy Evans will be in charge of the security of the house itself. Kevin ordered coldly. He added, "Remember that I need to prepare something tonight. If you notice anyone strange, kill them without hesitation, regardless of the reason."
"Yes, sir,"
Troy Evans and the others replied. They were all clearly ready to fight. They answered loudly without fear. "As for you," Kevin said as he looked at Kyle Thompson, "if there is nowhere else you need to be, you'd better stay up here on the second floor tonight. If you can't sleep, you still must not leave the house under any circumstances." "Understood, sir. I will not cause trouble for everyone," Kyle Thompson nodded and replied. Hearing this, the others looked at Kyle Thompson in surprise. Why was Kevin so intent on keeping him safe? Kevin did not explain too much. He turned around and went upstairs. Time passed by slowly. The night sky slowly turned darker. The bright lights around Swan Lake shone in the distance. However, in the darkness where the lights could not reach, a few figures quickly got out of a car and quickly walked to the island. You really know how to enjoy yourself. I can't believe he actually had such a nice place so close to the city." One of the men looked at the exquisite scenery around him and said with envy and jealousy,
"How did he become such a good friend of Tyler Dawn's anyway? That guy's a billionaire."
Another person replied in a sour tone,
"After this mission ends, we should kidnap Tyler Dawn and hold him for ransom. After we get the money, we'll leave the country."
Another person sneered and suggested. Before his companion could answer, a leisurely voice suddenly said,
"It's a good idea, but you may not be able to pull it off."
The moment this voice was heard, the four men stopped in their tracks at the same time. They quickly gathered their weapons and started to take small steps, vigilantly scanning their surroundings.
"Who's there?"
the leader of the group shouted in a stern voice.
"Don't speak so righteously. You make us look like the intruders,"
Dustin Newman said casually as he walked out from the darkness, eating a banana.
"Get rid of him! Hurry up!"
The leader of the group immediately gave the order. Immediately, one of them rushed out. With a flash of cold light, a dagger appeared in his hand. He threw himself at Dustin ferociously.
"How dare you yell in front of me?"
Dustin casually tossed aside the half-eaten banana in his hand. After the banana left Dustin's hand, it flew like a bullet and hit the man in the head, hitting him with so much force that it caused him to fall to the ground. At the same time, on the top floor of the house, Kevin was sitting cross-legged on the ground. His entire body and mind were immersed in the thin book in his hands. The island was bigger than he had imagined, but Kevin's plan was to set up a formation across the entire island so that no one could enter. After considering several possibilities for how to accomplish this, Kevin suddenly said, "I've got it." He snapped his fingers and a faint smile appeared on his face. Kevin then gathered his spiritual energy and started to draw a series of complicated patterns according to the contents of the secret book. Meanwhile, on a mountain peak outside of D.C., Matthew Thames stood alone on a cliff and watched the night sky in the distance. The cold wind on the mountaintop blew his clothes, but it did not change the expression on his aged face at all. Not long after he arrived, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. If Kevin was there, he would definitely recognize this person as one of his mentors, the Night King.
"It's been so many years since we last met. I thought you were dead,"
Matthew Thames said without even turning his head.
"Although living out in the open is not as good as living with the protection of the Reaper Squad, I'm afraid it's not so easy for me to die,"
the Night King replied coldly. Matthew Thames was slightly stunned at first, but then he smiled lightly. He did not change his expression because of the Night King's attitude.
"You're right. With your strength, if nothing unexpected happens to you, You won't have any problem living on for a very long time,"
Matthew Thames said, his eyes revealing some envy.
"From your tone, it seems like you are hoping that something will happen to me."
There was a slight hint of displeasure in the Night King's tone.
"How could that be? If it wasn't for your existence, how could we keep this world so honest?"
Matthew Thames shrugged his shoulders and answered very casually, but what he said was the truth.
"All right. That's enough small talk. We haven't spoken with each other in so many years. Why did you suddenly come to me?"
The Night King asked without changing his expression.
"It's a very lowly matter, but I have to ask. Can you lend me your disciple?"
Matthew Thames said, unwilling to dawdle any longer.
"No,"
the Night King answered immediately without thinking.
"Don't think I don't know. You want Kevin to go to the Mavericks."
Matthew Thames turned around and looked at the Night King in surprise. He did not expect the Night King to see through his attention so thoroughly after not showing his face for so many years. After thinking about it for a long moment, Matthew calmed down.
"So you have been secretly watching his movements? If I wasn't here, he would have died many times already."
The Night King snorted and replied,
"But I won't let him get involved in the war among the factions. He has much more important things to do." "Like what? Entering the upper realm? Fighting his way all the way to the top and taking over your own position eventually?"
Matthew Thames asked before answering his own question. The Night King did not answer but looked silently at the scenery in the distance.
"Do you think that's what Kevin wants?"
Matthew asked with a hint of excitement in his voice.
"I am his mentor. He can only take what I give. He must not take what I don't allow,"
the Night King said in a domineering manner. Upon hearing this, Matthew Thames almost cursed out loud. It had been many years since he was this angry, but he knew anger wasn't enough to beat the Night King in a war for control of Kevin.